Chapter 394. Gradually Wuxi's face turned serious. 108 bolts of lightning had struck down from the heavenly tribulation of dragon pythons of fire and ice, and it had not stopped yet. Although each of the lightning bolts only slightly injured Gold Horn and Silver Horn, the brothers were already riddled with scars after 108 minor injuries, and they had consumed more than half of the pills to replenish their strength. Hovering in midair, Wuxia looked quietly at the brothers. Pop, pop, pop. For thunderous booms could be heard. The meatball behind the two brothers suddenly blasted open, and 4 nearly 300-meter-long wings spread. The enormous wings were covered with densely packed gold and silver scales. When the wings flapped, a large expanse of dazzling talisman light surged in the air. The heat wave brought by the wings instantly melted the small hill, and the cold air that followed froze the small hill that had just melted into an ice cube. Dragon pythons of fire and ice looked like a dragon, but not a dragon, like a python, but not a python. After devouring so many demon cores and blood essences from Great Yan's secret vault, the brothers had reached the threshold of advancement. After cultivating their nascent divinity and compressing the blood essence in their bodies, the brothers would immediately inherit the inherited memories in their bloodline and possess extraordinary divine abilities. Dragon pythons of fire and ice. Wuxia was looking forward to the performance of this ancient species. Just as Wuxia rose to his feet, wondering how he could help them, the brothers suddenly widened their eyes, threw their heads back, and let out a long roar. Spirit breeding rings were used by cultivators to store their demon pets, various goo worms, and other living creatures. The principle was similar to that of a storage ring, but at the same time, it was not quite the same. The storage ring had a vast space, but the time was frozen, so it could store all kinds of spirit herbs and pills without losing their spirituality over time. However, the spirit breeding ring was equivalent to a small world. The natural energy in it was constantly communicating with the outside world, and the flow of time was the same as the outside world. Therefore, living creatures could hide in the ring. Before the brothers could digest the power contained in the lightning bolt, the tribulation cloud in the sky trembled, and another lightning bolt, thicker than the previous one, came crashing down. The two brothers soared into the sky, opened their mouths wide, and swallowed the tribulation lightning into their stomachs. Then they twisted their bodies and fell to the ground in a sorry state. With a mysterious smile on his face, Wuxia fished out a jar of sticky, pitch-black ointment from the black dragon spirit ring. With a shake of his hand, the ointment transformed into 2 fountains and shot into Gold Horn and Silver Horn's mouths. The 2 serpents, who had exhausted their strength, immediately regained their spirit. They gritted their teeth and tortured their bodies, trying to break free from the tough snakeskin cage. Swoosh! Swoosh! Several dozens of swishing noises rang out as all the heaven immortals in Yuanhua sect arrived at the scene with teleportation. The transparent wings were flapping lightly. Looking at Gold Horn and Silver Horn, the hassock of great ocean dividing serpent, he nodded and said, "Dragon pythons of fire and ice? Their numbers are 100 times fewer than our great divide, aren't they? Back then it was also a tyrannical race that once dominated the world. TSK. Again and again, and again, Wuxia simply sat cross-legged on the ground and shouted, "You can only rely on yourselves. Hang in there." Gold Horn and Silver Horn flew up at the same time. They opened their mouths and bit down on the thunderbolt, splitting it into 2 and swallowing it into their stomachs. Crack! A loud noise rang out as the tattered snakeskins on their bodies exploded at the same time. Countless scales scattered in all directions, and the brothers fell heavily to the ground, struggling and rolling in agony. Their newly regenerated snakeskins were shivering rapidly, expanding and growing rapidly. Gradually, the scales on their skin hardened, and numerous profound runes emerged on their surfaces. Looking at Hassock, Wuxia smiled and said, "With me around, their race will thrive again." Gold Horn and Silver Horn curled up their bodies at the same time. Gold Horn opened his mouth and breathed out a stream of cold air, smashing heavily onto Silver Horn's body. Silver Horn also breathed out a clump of flame, smashing heavily onto Gold Horn's body. Then, both brothers breathed out the power of tribulation that they could not withstand, asking their brother to use his innate divine ability to neutralize it. Meanwhile, the cold air from Gold Horn and the flame from Silver Horn were the energy they needed to form their dragon python souls and temper their dragon python bodies respectively. While rubbing the spirit breeding ring, Wuxia said in a deep voice, "It will be best if I can bring my demon pets with me, hee hee." Flapping their fleshy wings, the brothers flew up into the sky and entered the tribulation cloud, using their strong bodies to absorb the power of tribulation. One tribulation thunderbolt after another kept smashing onto their bodies. A strong light radiated from their bodies, and a frightening aura spread thousands of miles away. However, the materials used to make spirit breeding rings were becoming rarer and rarer in the current world of cultivators. Therefore, an ordinary spirit breeding ring was only about 10 feet in size. If word of Wuxia's spirit breeding ring, which could accommodate 10,000 longbow men, were spread out, it would be enough to scare a large number of people, and perhaps even those heaven immortals would not be able to restrain themselves from snatching it. On the contrary, those mighty figures at the level of Gold Immortal and above would not be greedy for it. After all, Gold Immortals were able to carry the small world they created with them, which was much stronger than the spirit breeding ring. The cold wind and the hot airflow ravaged the ground tens of miles in circumference, turning the ground into a lake of lava one moment, then a tundra the next. In just a few breaths of time, the forest within tens of miles had turned into the finest dust. Hasek was struck dumb. He gave Wuxia a deep look, then nodded and said, "Perhaps?" Shaking his head, Hasek remembered the confident smile on Wuxia's face, then turned and flew back into Wuxia's spiritual ocean, continuing to sleep in the boundless ocean, quietly absorbing the innate water energy produced in Wuxia's body. The roar sounded like that of a dragon, yet not at the same time. It was deep and resounding, with a hint of ferocity and brutality. If the roar of a dragon was said to be pearls and gems, then the roar of the brothers was a crystal ball that was fully covered with sharp thorns, glinting dazzlingly yet deadly. Gold Horn and Silver Horn's bodies trembled slightly. Suddenly, they opened their mouths and sprayed out a stream of flame and a stream of cold air towards Taoist Mo Luan. It was the Fire and Ice Thunder Tribulation, unique to the clan of dragon pythons of fire and ice. Just like other innately powerful creatures, when the experts from various clans such as dragons, phoenixes, and cheilants improved their cultivation base or underwent a metamorphosis, they would always be struck by a thunder tribulation unique to their own clan. The Fire and Ice Thunder Tribulation was exactly the same. The power of the thunder contained the opposite attributes of firmness and softness, scorching and bitter coldness. It was a thunder tribulation that was extremely difficult to guard against. Gold Horn and Silver Horn shook their big heads together, throwing their heads back and letting out a long roar. Their bodies nearly straightened up, like two huge trees facing the sky, supporting their bodies with only the tips of their tails. They opened their mouths, which measured nearly 10 feet in circumference, and aimed at the thunderclouds in the sky, assuming a posture as if they were going to devour everything. The newly grown snakeskins on the brothers' bodies shone with a faint glow. Streams of red and white light rippled out from them, gradually fusing into their bodies. Gold Horn and Silver Horn were lying lazily on the ground, their sharp claws feebly tearing their badly mutilated bodies. Their bodies were covered in bloody wounds, long wounds that ripped open their scales. Large pieces of gold and silver scales were hanging around the wounds in a messy manner. A few loud clangs rang out as Gold Horn knocked his forehead against the ground, bringing up a large number of fire sparks. The snakeskin on his forehead cracked, exposing the newly grown skin underneath that was milky white mixed with a hint of pale gold. Meanwhile, Silver Horn opened his mouth wide and bit a piece of broken skin on his body with his sharp fangs. As he shook his head over and over again, the crack on his skin grew bigger and bigger, exposing a large patch of new, silvery skin. Cracking noises kept ringing out from under their thick scales. Their bodies were growing, their bones were growing thicker and longer, and their muscles were becoming thicker and stronger. But their snakeskins had restricted their further development. They could only tear the snakeskins themselves, freeing their bodies from this natural cage. They had consumed a great deal of physical strength and energy. Their claws tore the snakeskins and produced shrill noises of friction. Their bodies wriggled slightly, and from time to time, flames and cold gleams sprayed out of their mouths. Stroking the spirit breeding ring, Wuqi was once again reminded of the question he had last time. Are demon pets allowed to be brought into the duel? Isn't it a little too much to bring two nascent divinity realm dragon pythons of fire and ice into the duel, with 10,000 longbow men ready to help at any time? Amidst the long and sonorous roars, the brothers' bodies expanded to about 1,000 feet long. Together with the huge, oddly shaped wings on their backs, they looked mighty and ferocious, like two fearsome ancient extraordinary beasts. Their claws had grown out as well. The 4 claws under their abdomens were similar to dragon claws, but they had one more joint, which made them much thicker, more agile, and more lethal. Their heads still looked like great pythons, but the dragon horns on their heads were bigger and more forked, and the cold wind and heat streams coiling around them made it harder for anyone to approach them. However, if Gold Horn and Silver Horn wanted to cultivate their nascent divinity, they would need the help of the thunder tribulation of ice and fire. They had to absorb and digest the unique fire and ice energy contained in the thunder tribulation, fusing them into their souls. Only then could they form their nascent divinity. If Wuqi were to help them resist the thunder tribulation at this moment, the brothers would never be able to make any progress in their entire lives. Looking at the brothers hovering midair absorbing the thunder tribulation, Taoist Emolwan was both surprised and envious. Why are these two beasts so fierce? He cursed under his breath. 10 days after Yuanhua sect assembly, Wuqi was seen hovering midair on top of a small hill surrounded by craggy rocks behind Green Cliff Mountain. Looking at the tribulation clouds in the sky, Wuqi frowned as he flew tens of miles backward. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, he said in a deep voice. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, be careful. When you run out of stamina, consume some pills immediately to replenish your energy and blood. Wuqi had prepared a great amount of pills for the brothers in advance. As long as Gold Horn and Silver Horn were not too careless, and the thunder tribulation did not kill them completely in one go, it would not be difficult for them to transcend the thunder tribulation. For a moment, red and white gleams were flashing on the brothers' bodies, while cold air and hot wind were spreading in all directions. The rocks on the small hill could not withstand the rapid change of heat and cold, and exploded and shattered one after another. Right at this moment, a very faint thunderclap echoed out from the sky, as a red and white thunderbolt came whistling down. The bestial aura emanating from Gold Horn and Silver Horn's bodies grew stronger and stronger. It was as if a baby had grown into a burly man who stood over 10 feet tall, and was burly with muscles all over his body. Their aura had become completely different from before. Guided by their aura, a thin layer of red cloud came wheeling slowly down from the sky. Amidst the cloud, numerous red thunderbolts as fine as hair and white cold air were seen rolling and tangling with each other. Piece after piece of snakeskin was ripped off by the brothers, while the aura emanating from their bodies grew stronger and stronger. An ancient bestial aura was vaguely spreading out from their bodies, while the gleam in their eyes grew stronger and stronger. Suddenly, Wuqi felt a chill on his forehead. The item spirit of Dark Een Hasek was startled by the aura, and sprung out from Wuqi's body in surprise. But I don't think any other cultivator has a spirit breeding ring with such a huge space, right? Chapter 395. No one expected that Gold Horn and Silver Horn would attack, just because of Taoist Emolwan's malicious words. However, dragon pythons of fire and ice were the most ferocious creatures under the heaven. In their eyes, apart from Wuqi, everyone else was no different than their food. After the baptism of the thunder tribulation of ice and fire, the two brothers had recovered the inherited memories of the dragon pythons of ice and fire in their bloodlines. They had also inherited the dragon pythons of ice and fire's ferocity and unreasonable arrogance. Since Taoist Emolwan dared to curse them, there was no reason for them not to attack. Every time they attacked, they would unleash a killing strike without showing any mercy. Like two comets, the 1,000 feet long red beam and the other white beam intertwined and shot across the sky, producing a shrill and unpleasant whistling noise. The noise went straight into Yuanhua sect's spiritual ocean, sounding like the howling of evil spirits from hell. It shook the souls of all the heaven immortals of Yuanhua sect in the surroundings. Even Patriarch Jiang Yun and Taoist Li, who were 36th tier heaven immortals, nearly had their immortal souls shaken out from their bodies. Taoist Emolwan's face fell. "Damn beasts," he bellowed furiously. With a wave of his right hand, a sheet of dark light flew out, transforming into an exquisite shield that measured about 1 foot in circumference. A large sheet of dark light and green smoke emanated from the shield, wrapping around his body. It was Taoist Emolwan's proudest magical treasure, an immortal item-grade defensive shield, the Smoke Luan Shield. It was crafted using the Earth Core Crimson Flame Dark Copper, and during the crafting process, Taoist Emolwan was lucky enough to obtain the soul of an extraordinary bird that possessed the bloodline of Luan and Phoenix as its item spirit. As a result, the shield possessed an extraordinary sentience and an outstanding defensive strength. Furthermore, when he wielded the Smoke Luan Shield, it was as if he had grown a pair of wings. His flying speed and dexterity were doubled. Therefore, not only did the Smoke Luan Shield have an outstanding defensive strength, it was also a great help to Taoist Emolwan in fights of magical powers. Wrapped in the dark light and green smoke, Taoist Emolwan tilted his body slightly to one side, and instantly moved several hundred feet away like a fish. According to the trajectory of the red and white lights, his casual evasion was enough to make Goldhorn and Silverhorn's attacks miss. It showed his uniqueness in the immortal technique and his outstanding vision. Only by evading in such a way could he show his status. However, Goldhorn and Silverhorn were ancient mutated dragon pythons of fire and ice. How could their attacks be dodged so easily? Swish! The red and white beams vanished abruptly, as they teleported right before Taoist Emolwan, and smashed forcefully onto the Smoke Luan Shield. A long cry that sounded like that of a dragon, yet not a dragon, rang out, followed by a sharp and melodious cry of a bird. The Smoke Luan Shield shone with a blinding light, and a large sheet of green light burst out. Taoist Emolwan gave a muffled snort as he was knocked flying away by the red and white light. Like a cannonball, he shot up over 100 miles into the sky. A series of clashing noises echoed out as the red and white light shattered inch by inch when they collided with the Smoke Luan Shield. Every inch of the red and white light would burst into a large sheet of red flame and countless cold gleams. When the flame and cold gleams collided, it was as if a vast ocean had plunged into a volcano in the Earth's core. Fire and water could not tolerate each other, resulting in a violent explosion. The power of each explosion was comparable to a heavenly thunderbolt. Although Taoist Emolwan had a profound cultivation base, he was still shaken by the explosions, and his blood and energy were roiling, while his immortal soul was nearly ripped out of his body by the constant dragon roars. Hiss, hiss. By now, Goldhorn and Silverhorn had absorbed all the thunder tribulation in the tribulation cloud into their bodies. Their dragon python nascent divinities had reached the phenomenal stage, and they had also obtained the mystic cultivation technique of dragon pythons of fire and ice in their bloodline, the Dragon Python Dark Scripture. It was a divine ability that allowed them to cultivate both their fleshly body and nascent divinity at the same time, and eventually, their fleshly body would turn into a saint. In the ancient times, the clan of dragon pythons of fire and ice relied on the Dragon Python Dark Scripture to dominate the world, even suppressing the dragons and becoming the leader of the scaled clan. At that time, the supreme experts of the dragon pythons of fire and ice could even eat divine dragons as food, ancient golden immortals as desserts, and ancient celestials as snacks. This showed how powerful the Dragon Python mystic scripture was. The brothers spread their fleshy wings and flapped them violently, bringing up a sheet of red light and a gust of cold wind. They let out long and sonorous roars as their scales opened and closed, while the enormous dragon python energies in their bodies were rolling rapidly along the meridians recorded in the Dragon Python Dark Scripture. Like two black holes, the brothers were rapidly absorbing the surrounding natural energies and converting them into new dragon python energies. Dragon pythons were greedy and brutal by nature, and the same was true for their cultivation technique. If one were to say that immortal cultivators still had to consider the harmony between heaven and earth, the core of Dragon Python's cultivation technique was only one thing: plunder, plunder, plunder until the pond was dry. Devour, devour, devour without any taboo. As the brothers unleashed their power, the energy veins under the back of Green Cliff Mountain rocked violently, while the natural energies in the underground veins turned into raging tides that could be seen with naked eyes and rushed into the brothers' bodies. Their cultivation base grew rapidly, and the newly born dragon python energies quickly filled their new bodies, which had expanded to about 1,000 feet long. Their strength grew stronger and stronger, and as their overall strength grew, their ability to absorb natural energies became stronger as well. Amidst wild roars, Goldhorn and Silverhorn flapped their wings ferociously, transforming into two beams of light that chased after Taoist Mo Luan. Their fangs were clenched so tightly that they produced cracking noises, while saliva was dripping down from the corners of their mouths. It looked like they were very hungry for Taoist Mo Luan. When Goldhorn's saliva dripped on the ground, each drop of it melted the ground within a radius of 1,000 feet into lava, while Silverhorn's saliva turned a small hill into an iceberg. The surrounding heaven immortals looked at each other with great astonishment. When had they ever seen such ferocious and strange pythons? Meanwhile, Taoist Qi and Taoist Min had turned to look at Wuxia. They knew that Goldhorn and Silverhorn were Wuqia's demon pets, and Wuxia had brought them to the back of the mountain, preparing to transcend their thunder tribulation. Taoist Qi could not help but grin and say, "It seems there is no rule against bringing demon pets during the match." Although Taoist Min did not get along well with Taoist Qi, this was a matter that concerned the foundation and future of Yuanhua sect. Upon hearing Taoist Qi's words, Taoist Min nodded and said, that's right. These two dragon pythons are as strong as a few nascent divinity cultivators. If nothing goes wrong, we will definitely win this match." Both men exchanged a glance, and with a tacit understanding, they did not summon Taoist Mo Luan, Goldhorn and Silverhorn back. Taoist Qi wished that Goldhorn and Silverhorn would give Taoist Mo Luan a good beating, while Taoist Min was pondering whether Taoist Mo Luan could kill these two dragon pythons. Although this was an important matter related to the match, Yuanhua sect still had a great chance of winning with or without these two dragon pythons. Therefore, it was better to let Mo Luan kill these two beasts. Taoist Mo Luan's body trembled violently as the powerful red and white light finally dissipated. He was so angry that he let out a strange laugh and cursed. "What a pair of beasts! Beasts! I'll definitely teach you a good lesson today." The dazzling smoke Luan shield sprayed out a burst of dark gleam and green smoke, as Taoist Mo Luan gracefully sped through the air, leaving tens of afterimages behind as he quickly approached Goldhorn and Silverhorn, who were leaping towards him. Taoist Mo Luan had the intention to show off his movement technique. With the help of the smoke Luan shield, his movement technique was agile and quick, without any hesitation. He was like a feather gliding amidst a strong wind, and when he turned, even the divine will of ordinary heaven immortals could not locate his exact location. A movement technique like this gave him a great advantage in a fight of magical powers. No one could locate Taoist Mo Luan, and none of their magical spells, flying swords, or magical treasures could hit him. On the other hand, he could attack his enemies with ease, which naturally gave him a great advantage. But today this advantage was completely ineffective in front of Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Dragon pythons of fire and ice had all sorts of magical features in their strong fleshly bodies, one of which was their incredible vision. As long as Goldhorn and Silverhorn focused their attention on their eyes, they could see even the transmission of photons clearly. They could even see through the teleportation of an immortal's body in different dimensions when he was teleporting. As for the strongest ancient dragon pythons of fire and ice, their eyes could even go back in time and see what had happened in the past. Aided by their incredible eyesight, both brothers could see every single detail of Taoist Mo Luan's body. Nevertheless, Goldhorn and Silverhorn were very cunning. They pretended to be flustered by Taoist Mo Luan's unpredictable afterimages, hooking their tails together and forming a ring-shaped protective circle with their wings. Their big claws were tucked under their abdomens, and their big heads were glancing around in panic, while wisps of flame and streams of cold air kept bursting out of their mouths. Taoist Mo Luan had forgotten that just like the other immortals of Yuanhua sect, he was severely wounded at the moment, and his overall strength was only less than 30% of his peak state. His current magical power and divine abilities were only equal to an ordinary 36th tier heaven immortal. On top of that, he could not fight with all his might, as once he used too much immortal energy, his already stabilized injuries would flare up immediately. Even under such circumstances, Taoist Emol still wasted his immortal energy wantonly, showing off his magical and unpredictable movement technique as he gracefully approached Gold Horn and Silver Horn. Suddenly, Taoist Min's voice rang out in Taoist Emol mind. "My disciple, kill these two beasts. You have a good excuse to kill them since they attacked you first." Upon hearing Taoist Min's voice, Taoist Emol's eyes lit up. He opened his mouth and shot out a white flying sword shaped like a sparrow's beak. It transformed into a curved beam of light and shot gracefully towards the vital spots between Gold Horn and Silver Horn's brows. Last time, Taoist Emol's flying sword was destroyed by Patriarch Jiangyin, and Wuxia had snatched its remains and fed it to the earth element dragon scale shield. The flying sword Taoist Emol was using now was an immortal item grade flying sword, which Taoist Min had spent a lot of effort to buy for him. However, although it was an immortal item grade flying sword, it was much weaker than his original flying sword in terms of both power and intelligence. Right when the sword beam shot out, Gold Horn and Silver Horn's bodies suddenly turned blurry. Without any preparation, the brothers teleported right next to Taoist Emol's true form. The sword beam brushed past their bodies, not harming them at all. Their heads and tails joined each other, forming a circle that trapped Taoist Emol within. Then they thrust their huge claws out, bringing together a large sheet of raging flame and a cold gleam as they slapped viciously onto Taoist Emol's body. Like an iron hammer smashing a rubber ball, the brothers' huge claws slapped viciously onto the dazzling green smoke that protected Taoist Emol's body, sending him flying all over the sky. He waved his arms and legs and could no longer keep his balance. After a few tens of violent attacks, the smoke wand shield actually exploded with a loud crack. Gold Horn thrust his tail, which was covered with razor-sharp scales and stood erect like blades, and smashed forcefully onto Taoist Emol's chest. Chapter 396. The sudden explosion of the smoke wand shield stunned all the heaven immortals present. Even Taoist Emol's mind went blank, as he could not figure out what was going on. No matter what, Taoist Emol had asked a 29th tier item crafting master from Pyuo Heavenly Realm, and spent several tens of thousands of years to gather the geocentric crimson flame dark copper. It was an immortal item that Taoist Emol was proud of. Not even ordinary heaven immortals could break the defense of the smoke wand shield. Yet it was completely destroyed by these two great serpents? Taoist Qi and Taoist Min had their mouths agape at the same time. Taoist Qi had a strange smile on his face, while Taoist Min's face turned blue. Meanwhile, all the heaven immortals from Yuanhua sect turned to look at Wuxia at the same time. This little fellow was the master of these two great serpents. Gold Horn's tail slapped heavily on Taoist Emol's chest. Taoist Emol had never tempered his immortal body, and only focused on the cultivation of his immortal soul and magical power. However, dragon pythons of fire and ice were famous for their powerful fleshly bodies since the ancient times. With just a swing of their tails, they left a half-foot deep wound on Taoist Emol's chest, nearly cutting him open. A large amount of golden immortal blood sprayed out from the wound, while Taoist Emol was knocked flying backward and slammed headfirst into Silver Horn. Laughing strangely, Silver Horn grabbed Taoist Emol with one claw and shoved him into his mouth. While attacking, he said hastily, "Don't worry, elder brother. I'll eat the upper body and leave the lower body for you. TSK, there is still a good ingredient for the three-whip soup." Gold Horn cursed anxiously, curling up his body and leaping towards Silver Horn. Upper body, upper body. 70% of the essence of an immortal was gathered in the upper body. The internal organs were the source of the 5 energies in an immortal's body. The head was the place where the immortal soul and intelligence gathered, and the most valuable thing of an immortal was the upper body. If Silver Horn took the upper body for himself, didn't that mean all the benefits of Emol would belong to him? As for the good ingredient, Gold Horn was not interested in it at all. The two great serpents were rolling and struggling in midair for the sake of Taoist Emol, who was badly wounded. Taoist Emol was tightly gripped by Silver Horn's claws, and the tremendous force nearly crushed his severely wounded immortal body. The destruction of the smoke phoenix shield had affected his immortal soul and caused it to suffer a heavy injury. Presently, his mind was in a state of turmoil, and he didn't even have the strength to fight back. Nevertheless, Taoist Mo1 had no time to care about the discomfort, as he kept howling at the top of his voice. How could this be? The smoke phoenix shield is a 30th grade immortal artifact. How can it be shattered by two beasts who have just condensed their nascent divinities? How could this be? The smoke wand shield is a 30th grade immortal artifact, the masterpiece of Master Swan Dan. How could you break it? Wuxia stood on the ground with his hands behind his back and sneered. Using the mystic eyes of universe, Wuxia had seen the scene of the smoke wand shield shattering. That's right, it was a grade 30 immortal artifact, a pretty good item. Unfortunately, its main material was the geocentric scarlet flame mysterious copper. This kind of pure yang material had amazing defensive power. It had excellent defensive power against all kinds of true fire and lightning spells. However, everyone has their own advantages and disadvantages, and every living thing under the heaven had something that could restrain them. The geocentric scarlet flame mysterious copper was afraid of the attack from acquired energy. Gold horn's scorching flames and hot air did not pose any threat to the smoke phoenix shield, but the cold gleam shot out by silver horn contained a threat of innate energy that was unique to the clan of dragon pythons of fire and ice, which was produced by using their own bodies as the cauldron. The power of the cold gleam was incredible, and the smoke phoenix shield was perfectly restrained by it. How could it not shatter? Seeing that Taoist Mo1 was about to be tortured to death by the two brothers, Wuxia cleared his throat and cried out. All right, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, put down Uncle Master Mo1. If you eat something wrong, you will have diarrhea. Gold Horn and Silver Horn, who were chasing each other in midair, turned stiff immediately, lowering their heads like deflated balloons. Silver Horn rolled his eyes and loosened his claws, causing Taoist Mo1 to fall down like a rock. However, Taoist Mo1 was, after all, an experienced heaven immortal. Although he was severely wounded just now, he still managed to catch his breath and stabilize his body after falling for several hundred feet. He gave Gold Horn and Silver Horn a glance, who looked dejected and sad because their delicacies were gone, and said with a deep voice, For today's humiliation Wuxia interrupted Taoist Mo1. With both hands clasped behind his back, he sighed and said, Why are you bickering with two beasts, Uncle Master? They know nothing, and they are just two greedy beasts. They are just transcending their thunder tribulation. Yet they were insulted by someone. That is why their wild nature flared up and attacked you, Uncle Master. As a heaven immortal, bickering with two beasts is a disgrace to your status. Although Wuxia's words were extremely unpleasant to the ears, they had captured the thoughts of these heaven immortals. It was Taoist Mo1 who insulted Gold Horn and Silver Horn first, and then the two beasts attacked him. They were beasts, so how could one reason with them? Taoist Mo1 brought this upon himself, and no one could help him. As for the fact that Taoist Mo1's prized immortal item was destroyed, and he himself was severely wounded by Gold Horn and Silver Horn, how could he still have the nerve to continue talking about this matter when he could not even deal with the two beasts he mentioned? Taoist Mo1's face turned green and red with anger, and he nearly coughed out blood. Fortunately, he knew that he was now suffering from more injuries. In the battle with Huiling sect, he was already severely wounded, and 70% of his cultivation base was temporarily crippled. Now he was wounded by Gold Horn and Silver Horn. If he coughed out another mouthful of blood, it would undoubtedly be one disaster after another, and his immortal soul and energy would be damaged. For Taoist Mo1, every drop of blood was extremely precious, and the loss of a drop of blood would make his injuries worse. He cupped his fist and bowed to Taoist Min without saying a word. With a gloomy face, he picked up the broken pieces of the smoke wand shield and put away its item spirit and soul, then staggered and stepped onto a cloud, preparing to leave. But right at this moment, a beam of golden light sprinkled down from the sky and shone on Taoist Mo1's body. An enormous immortal energy essence was injected into Taoist Mo1's body from afar, healing his injuries at an incredible speed. Taoist Qi, Taoist Min, and Immortal Tai Yu were startled. These heaven immortals cupped their fists and said, Ancestral Master Yu. Patriarch Yuan Hua's voice was heard coming from afar. Cheer Minor and Mulwan Wuqi, come here, all of you, he said in a low voice. Those who were called by Patriarch Yuan Hua dared not to be negligent. Without hesitation, they quickly stepped onto clouds and flew towards Green Cliff Mountain. The beam of golden light followed Taoist and Mulwan all the way to Green Cliff Mountain, and only then it slowly faded away. After being replenished by the enormous immortal energy essence in the golden light, Taoist and Mulwan's injuries were 70 to 80% healed, and even his immortal body, which was severely wounded by Huiling sex immortals, had almost fully recovered. As Patriarch Yuan Hua's cultivation base was much stronger than Taoist and Mulwan, the fact that he was consuming his own energy essence to heal Taoist and Mulwan was like an elephant transfusing blood to an ant. Every little bit of blood the elephant lost was more than enough for the ant to exchange all its blood. In Patriarch Yuan Hua's eyes, Taoist and Mulwan's injuries were nothing serious. But immortal energy essence was extremely important, and if it was not necessary, which heaven immortal would waste his own energy essence to heal someone else, that would be too great a loss. The group of 4 men and 2 serpents came before Patriarch Yuan Hua's wooden hut, but they still could not find him. The door was tightly shut, and they could only hear his voice. Are these 2 great serpents the legendary ancient extraordinary beasts, dragon pythons of fire and ice? Excellent. With just 1 snow-armored heaven-devouring python, Eminent Cloud Sect is able to reign supreme in Pueyuo heavenly realm. In the future, Yuan Hua Sect will not be weaker than them. Gold Horn and Silver Horn twitched their mouths and turned their heads away indifferently. What was a snow-armored heaven-devouring python? According to the bloodline memories of the brothers, this little fellow was nothing but a disdainful existence. Dragon pythons of fire and ice were the supreme existences of the ancient scaled clan, while snow-armored heaven-devouring python was at most a local tyrant. The gap between them was simply too huge. Patriarch Yuan Hua gave Gold Horn and Silver Horn a few praises, then his tone suddenly turned extremely heavy. It has been 100,000 years. You should have had enough, right? Taoist Qi and Taoist Min's faces flickered with fear. They exchanged a glance, then dropped to their knees at the same time. Taoist and Mulwan dared not to say a word, and hastily dropped to his knees as well. Patriarch Yuan Hua sighed and said, "Many years ago, the few of us, master and disciples, had spent a lot of effort to build a strong foundation in Pueyuo heavenly realm. But because of Qing Fu, both of you turned against each other, causing a foul atmosphere in the sect. For the sake of the relationship between us, master and disciple, I allowed you to do whatever you wanted. Now have you had enough?" Taoist Qi and Taoist Min remained kneeling on the ground, daring not to say a word. They just kept kowtowing. Cold sweat kept breaking out of Taoist Mulwan's forehead, and his body was trembling slightly. Patriarch Yuan Hua said in a deep voice, "Today, I'll make the final decision. That's enough. A formidable enemy is approaching us, and a great calamity is right before our eyes. Yet we still want to make a scene. Are you going to let Yuan Hua Sect's foundation vanish before you stop?" Taoist Qi and Taoist Min asked in surprise. "What do you mean by that, master?" Patriarch Yuan Hua said in a deep voice, "This is a very serious matter. Apart from me, only you, Cheer and Minner, can know about it. Cheer, assemble all the disciples who will participate in the match, and make the final preparations. During the match, you will lead the team and keep watch. I'll only appear when I'm fighting with that old fogey Huiling alone. As for Minner, bring your capable disciples, and bring all the thunderbolt seeds we have in our storage. You can use all the powerful immortal talismans, formation flags, and formation discs." Grinning coldly, Patriarch Yuan Hua said with a hint of killing intent, "In 10 days' time, a strange beast will transcend its thunder tribulation in the windy plain of Tsangtu planet. Minner, bring all the disciples and sneak in. Find an opportunity to severely injure that strange beast during the thunder tribulation." Taoist Qi and Taoist Min were taken aback at the same time. Wu Qi's eyes flickered as he asked in a deep voice, "Ancestral Master, is that strange beast the snow-armored heaven-devouring python from Eminent Cloud Sect? Could it be that he is about to advance his cultivation base by another tier?" Is that enough for him to transform into a human form? Daoist Qi, Daoist Min, and Daoist Emoluan were taken aback, but they quickly nodded their heads as if they were enlightened. After a full 15 minutes, Patriarch Yuanhua continued speaking. However, his tone was filled with a strong surprise and joy. Wuqi, my dear disciple, you are a smart and quick-witted one. Haha. It is the great python of eminent cloud sect, the snow-armored heaven-devouring python, who is about to transcend his thunder tribulation. Wuqi laughed, nodded his head thoughtfully and said, No wonder Yun Tianao was so easy to talk to when Yun Wuqi was eaten by catfish. Patriarch Yuanhua laughed and said, That's right. No wonder Yun Tianao was so easy to talk to that day. Whispers replaced the laughter. Wuqi and his company began to discuss in low voices with Patriarch Yuanhua across the wooden hut. Chapter 397. With an awkward smile on his face, Wuqi quickly turned his head and grabbed Princess Zhongli's little hand, telling her that he was already an ordinary mortal in the mortal world, and that it was impossible for him to have anything to do with the Buddhist League. Guru Guhi was taken aback. Then a faint smile emerged on his face, and his lips moved slightly. Then his voice rang out in Wuqi's mind once again. Don't be afraid, don't panic, benefactor. You are fated with the Buddhist League, and sooner or later, you will convert to the Buddhist League and comprehend the supreme principles together. Everyone around you, as long as you know them, can join the Buddhist League and become a bodhisattva, a vajra, or a protector of the heavenly kings. All of them are supreme Buddhas. There are 3,000 great Daos in the Buddhist League, and all 3,000 great Daos can lead to supreme Buddhas. The pure land of ultimate bliss of the Buddhist League is a supreme land. The magical techniques of the Buddhist League are boundless, so. All of a sudden, a bright and clear ray of light sprinkled down from the sky, as over 100 cultivators were descending at a high speed amidst a large cloud of light. Immortal Chuan raised his eyelids and gave them a glance, then clapped his hands and said with a smile, Wonderful! The fellow immortals from Huiling sect are here. Hee, only the people from Yuanhua sect are left. Gritting his teeth, he calculated that Huiling sect's overall strength would never be able to fight against the celestial court of Hua Luo heavenly realm represented by Reverend Miao Miao, and he was far from being a match for Reverend Miao Miao, a 26th-tier heaven immortal. Although Reverend Huilin had a bellyful of anger, he could only smile and nod at the surrounding immortals. As immortals had endless years, it was only natural that they would be extremely bored. Standing next to Immortal Chuan was Reverend Miao Miao, the immortal monarch of Celestial Court of Hua Luo Heavenly Realm, a lower upper-grade heavenly realm bordering Piluo Heavenly Realm. He pulled out a large dice bowl from under his sleeve and shouted, Fellow immortals, come! Today is the grand occasion. How can we not make a bet? Place your bets. Place your bets. Who will be the winner between the disciples of Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect? Who will be the ancestral masters of both sects? Place your bets. The lowest bet is 1 immortal stone. Ha ha ha. Ha ha. Daoist Qi glared at Reverend Huilin without showing any sign of weakness. He said coldly, My master is adjusting his breath in a secluded place and recuperating his spirit. He'll be ready to draw his sword and kill him later. Reverend Huilin froze for a moment and frowned. After the duel between the disciples of the two sects, the finale was the duel between him and Patriarch Yuanhua. Before the duel between two immortals with similar cultivation bases, one impatiently traveled a long way from Huangqiao planet to Piluo Heavenly Realm with his disciples, while the other meditated somewhere outside Piluo Heavenly Realm, and the other meditated and regulated his breath. Therefore, the difference in strength between the two was obvious. Unknowingly, Patriarch Yuanhua had gained the upper hand. Reverend Huilin's expression immediately turned extremely unsightly. I'm having a life-and-death duel with my disciple here. Yet you, Reverend Miao Miao, are betting on this life-threatening shady business? Reverend Huilin was severely wounded, and did not look much better than 1 year ago. Clad in a bright red Taoist robe and a Taoist crown on his head, he came before the group of immortals on a cloud, together with over 100 disciples. Reverend Huilin glanced around, then cupped his fist and said in a deep voice, Fellow immortals, you have come from afar. After Huiling sect wins the victory today, We will hold a feast to celebrate with all of you. Reverend Gu he had a green wooden medallion tied around his waist, engraved with 4 glinting relics. Surprisingly, he was a golden arhat with a cultivation base equivalent to a 24th tier heaven immortal, 1 level higher than Immortal Chuan, a 25th tier heaven immortal. A soundless Buddhist chant rang out directly in Wu Qi's mind. Merciful Buddha, benefactor, you are destined to meet the Buddha. Reverend Miao Miao was beaming with joy, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. He and Immortal Chuan's brows twitched, and immediately came to an agreement. Reverend Miao Miao would be the banker, while Immortal Chuan, as the host, would get 50% of the profit. In the sky above the glazed heaven immortal abode, where Immortal Chuan was cultivating in seclusion, a fragrant wind lingered in the air, and clouds filled the sky. Many heaven immortals stood on the clouds in groups, calling out to their friends and greeting their acquaintances loudly. No one knew how long immortals had been cultivating, and usually, a secluded cultivation would last for several thousand years. Many immortals whom they were familiar with had not seen each other for several tens of thousands of years. Now that they had finally met their old friends, they were naturally in a happy mood, greeting each other. Reverend Huilan's heart sank, his immortal energy stagnated, and his mind was thrown into disorder. But soon he thought of his trump card. After a brief moment of pondering, he sneered and returned to normal. Grinning coldly, he nodded and said, Yuan Hua always likes to take advantage of others. Now that he is circulating his cultivation technique and regulating his breath, do you think he can fully recover his injuries? With various thoughts and goals in mind, over 1,300 heaven immortals from Puyo Heavenly Realm and a few nearby heavenly realms came to the scene. Among them were even the immortal monarchs from a few nearby heavenly realms, who had brought their subordinates to watch the show excitedly. When immortals were gambling, the stakes were extremely rare immortal stones. Many of these heaven immortals were wealthy immortals, and all of them had placed at least 10 lower-grade immortal stones on the bet. Especially a few heaven immortals from Hualuo Heavenly Realm, who were trying to curry favor with Reverend Miao Miao, had placed a huge bet of 30 lower-grade immortal stones. On the other hand, the surrounding immortals were shouting excitedly. Hiding among the disciples of Yuan Hua sect, Wu Qi was looking curiously at Pilgrim Gu He, who stood right next to Immortal Chuan. The other few immortal monarchs from the celestial court were either clad in Taoist outfits, or the official robes of immortal officials. They were shrouded in a faint immortal glow, giving them an extraordinary bearing. On the other hand, Pilgrim Gu He had a bald head and a ring scar on his face. He was clad in a green monk robe and a pair of straw sandals, with a string of Buddhist beads the size of chicken eggs wrapped around his left wrist. He was a Buddhist cultivator with an accomplished cultivation base. Wu Qi had never thought that he would have an affinity with Pilgrim Gu He just because he gave him a glance. Wu Qi would never believe that Pilgrim Gu He was a monk in his previous life. As if he had noticed Wu Qi's gaze, Pilgrim Gu He suddenly turned to look at Wu Qi, clasped his palms together, and uttered a Buddhist mantra. Reverend Miao Miao and the other immortals nodded and smiled, agreeing to Immortal Chuan's suggestion. For those bored yet immortal immortals, if news of such a fun match were to spread out, it would be worth at least several dozens of periods of time in the long years to come. A grand event like this would bring great benefits to their reputation. Naturally, they were more than happy to be the witness. Among the over 1,000 heaven immortals, at least 90% of them were bored. Upon hearing Reverend Miao Miao's words, they immediately produced one jade slip after another with a smile on their faces, on which were recorded their bets and the amount of their bets. With Reverend Miao Miao, an immortal official of the celestial court, acting as the banker, these immortals were not afraid that they would not be able to collect their bets. Right at this moment, a sudden outburst of cries interrupted Pilgrim Gu He's chatter. Reverend Huilan's eyes went wide as he stared at Taoist Qi and cried out furiously, Taoist Qi, where is Yuan Hua? The match between their disciples would decide the ownership of a planet with abundant energy stones that had never been mined before. It could almost determine the future development of a sect for the next 10,000 years. Over 1,300 heaven immortals had brought tens of thousands of disciples with them, as well as countless strange mounts. Some of these mounts had glowing furs, some had shiny horns, and some were treading upon strange phenomena such as water, fire, wind, and clouds. All sorts of strange phenomena filled the sky with dazzling lights. It was truly a scene of immortals, different from the world of mortals. From time to time, some immortals would fly down from the sky on clouds. Every time they did so, it would draw the exclamations and whispers of laughter from the crowd of immortals. Hearty laughter resounded through the heaven and earth. Streams of light, clouds, flood dragons, Yuan phoenixes, white deers, immortal cranes, heaven immortals, together with their disciples, were seen traversing across the void with their divine abilities, heading straight towards Puyuo heavenly realm. Strange lights flickered in the sky, and a fragrant breeze filled the air. Some immortals who loved extravagance even spent their immortal energies to hoist palaces, pavilions, or even small mountains up into the sky, heading straight towards Puyuo heavenly realm. Today was the day of the match between Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect. Upon hearing the news, all the heaven immortals from Puyuo heavenly realm and several dozens of nearby heavenly realms had come to Puyuo heavenly realm with great interest. An ancient abode of the human race? What was that? Wuqi quickly went through Lady Dark Goldwater's memories, but found nothing. This was the first time Wuqi saw a cultivator from the Buddhist League in this world. Reverend Gu. He was a skinny man, with a dignified and solemn face. His skin was shimmering with a faint golden gleam. Obviously, he had cultivated the Dharma body of Vajra unique to Buddhist League to a very powerful realm. Yet the Golden Arhat of Buddhist League was one of the few existences who could fight against a powerful race like the Heavenly Dragon clan with just their fleshly bodies. Shaking his head and smiling disapprovingly, Reverend Huilin cupped his fist at Immortal Chuan and said, "Immortal Monarch, please be the witness for the match between our two sects." Immortal Chuan laughed out loud, then turned to Reverend Miao Miao from Hualuo Heavenly Realm, Immortal Tsang Miao from Yuan Luo Heavenly Realm, Immortal Carefree from Mi Luo Heavenly Realm, and Reverend Gu He from Nai Luo Heavenly Realm, and said, "Fellow Immortal Monarchs, why don't we join hands to be the witness for this match? In the future, when this matter is mentioned, it will be a great story in 5 Luo Heavenly Realm." The match between the ancestral masters of two sects would decide the ownership of their sects, and it would directly determine the rise and fall of a sect. Even if they could obtain the Energy Stone planet, they would lose the foundation of their sects, and the decline of the sect was just around the corner. While Wuqi was dizzy from the noise, he heard Immortal Chuan say complacently, "That's right. The venue of the life and death match between the disciples of Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect will be held at the place I've recently discovered, the ancient mansion of the human race." Wuqi was so scared that his hair stood on end. Suddenly, he recalled the various novels he read back on Earth. Didn't all the monks in those novels do the same thing? It was easy to say that the benefactor was fated with the Buddha, and then the treasures would become their treasures, and the disciples with good aptitudes would also become their disciples. This was the most favorite trick of these bald monks. As all the immortals placed their bets, the sky was filled with streams of light. Suddenly, a strong light burst out from the Grand Universal Teleportation Formation in Puyuo Heavenly Realm. Led by Taoist Qi, Immortal Green Staff, and Goddess Green Melon, all 110 cultivators from Yuanhua sect who participated in the match slowly walked out from the formation. Compared to those immortals who came to Puyuo Heavenly Realm by exercising their divine abilities and Dharma spells, Yuanhua sect was keeping a very low profile. It had been a very long time since such a direct confrontation between two great immortal sects took place in the last several dozens of periods. Therefore, how could people not be curious, their blood boiling, and not rush to Puyuo Heavenly Realm to watch the show? Especially the various immortal sects in Puyuo Heavenly Realm, they were paying close attention to the outcome of the match. Regardless of the outcome, the overall strength of both great immortal sects would definitely be greatly affected. Perhaps, this would be the opportunity for some small immortal sects to rise to prominence. Pilgrim Gu He kept talking to Wuqi for at least the time it took to finish a meal. Wuqi was soaked in sweat as he listened to the conversation, and he nearly cursed out loud. "Can you stand having 10,000 flies whispering in your ears?" All the immortals smiled and nodded their heads. Apart from some heaven immortals who were on friendly terms with Huiling sect, 99% of the people did not take Reverend Huilan's words seriously. You think Huiling sect is going to win? I don't think so, right? Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect had been fighting for that energy stone planet for over 1,000 years. Yuanhua sect had only lost a group of nascent divinity and nascent soul disciples, while Huiling sect had lost an elder with an overall strength of 35th tier. Speaking of losses, Huiling sect had far more losses than Yuanhua sect. Are you sure you can win today? Chapter 398. These small landmasses possessed a very strong offensive and defensive strength. In fact, they were war tools created by the human race, and were called war cities. At that time, there were a total of 8 strongest war cities of the human race, named after the 8 wisest and strongest emperors of the human race, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Those war cities even had the power to fight head-on against the strongest gods of the ancient god race. Between the heavenly realms was a chaotic starry sky. It was a primordial chaos that even the great Saint Pangu could not open up. It was filled with violent energy tides that even primordial immortals dared not to step into. Energy tides of various Xiantian level would explode from time to time, and ordinary immortals would be torn to shreds by just touching a tiny bit of the energy waves. 220 cultivators from both immortal sects stepped onto their sword beams and flew towards the small landmass at top speed. Immortal Chuan pointed at the ancient mansion, smiled at Reverend Huilan and said, with the mysterious restrictive spells on this piece of land, it can provide for the needs of several tens of heaven immortals, and several tens of thousands of cultivators. Immortal Chuan showed his teeth and smiled. His face was flushed, and he looked very proud of himself. Daoist Qi cupped his fist and said, all the disciples of Yuanhua sect are upright and above board, and we never do anything shady. The few immortal monarchs and heaven immortals shook their heads indifferently, then nodded again. Carefully, Immortal Chuan led the group of immortals, and opened up a small tunnel in the chaotic starry sky, traveling several tens of thousands of miles. It was just a short distance of several tens of thousands of miles, but it had already made these immortals gasp for breath, and made their faces turn pale with fear, cold sweat trickling down their backs. Wuxia, who was pondering the stories of the ancient human race told by Immortal Chuan, nearly burst out laughing when he heard Immortal Chuan's words. This Immortal Chuan was really good at doing business. No wonder he would follow Reverend Huilan to Yuanhua sect to be the notary, and increase the bet by such a huge amount. Apparently, he was waiting for some unlucky disciple from both immortal sects to lose their important land, and then purchase this mansion filled with abundant natural energy from him. Laughing loudly, Immortal Chuan pointed his finger at the mansion. Immortal Chuan spread his arms and said with a bitter smile, if I had gained some benefits from it, I wouldn't have asked all of you to come here. Benjun spent several years turning over every blade of grass and every tree, but didn't find anything good. However, I don't have enough power to destroy the mansion in the core of the Forgotten Manor. Therefore, I intentionally announced it to the public. Which immortal friend has the ability to benefit from it? After this battle, you can go and try your luck. It will be a great story. Daoist Master Huilan said in a cold voice. The disciples of my Huiling sect would never do such a disgraceful thing. From afar, this small landmass looked like a delicate bonsai. There were mountains, lakes, flowers, and trees. There was even a small fireball hovering above the landmass. It revolved around the landmass like a sun, providing heat and light for the living beings on the landmass. There should be some good things in the mansion of the ancient human race. But they were all extremely troublesome things, and were not very useful to immortal cultivators. Therefore, although the mansion was very attractive, its attraction was more in the mansion itself, not the treasures in it. However, according to the unwritten rule of immortals, since Immortal Chuan had found this mansion, all the other immortals had the right to fight for the treasures in it, but the mansion itself belonged to Immortal Chuan. If not for that, why would Immortal Chuan bring so many immortals here in such a generous manner? Suddenly, a strong natural energy came rushing at them from the front. Wuxia and all the cultivators from Yuanhua sect had rushed into the mansion. The starry sky was filled with chaotic airflows. If an ordinary immortal accidentally let them invade his body, the effect would be no different from injecting the venom of a poisonous snake into the blood vessels of a mortal. Apart from those almighty experts who had transcended the realm of primordial immortal by cultivating innate cultivation techniques, no immortal dared to let the chaotic airflows get close to them. On top of that, the chaotic airflows were extremely heavy. Just a strand of chaotic airflow as thin as a hair was 100 times heavier than a lofty mountain. It was not hard to imagine how much immortal energy it would take to open up a safe passage in such a starry sky. As Wuxia was flying forward while holding Princess Zhongli's little hand, Guru Guhi's voice suddenly rang out in his ears. "Little friend, there is a fate between you and the Buddha. If you encounter any danger during the match, you just have to shout, 'Master, save me,' and I'll definitely do my best to save you. Little friend, if you join the Buddhist League, you will find endless happiness. If you are willing to cultivate in seclusion, there are countless beautiful sceneries in the land of ultimate bliss. If you are interested in dual cultivation, there is also the Great Joy Zen technique in the Buddhist League. I have a senior brother who is an outstanding talent in that technique. I can let you join his sect." After entering the spherical space, all the immortals breathed out a heavy sigh of relief and felt completely at ease. It made sense, as the natural energy in the vicinity of the mansion was really rich, even much richer than that of Myriad Immortals' planet. Although the landmass was a little smaller, the density of natural energy was very high. If one were to compare it seriously, the total amount of natural energy here was about the same as that of Green Cliff Planet. If either Huiling sect or Yuan Hua sect were to lose their headquarters today, this ancient mansion could really serve as a temporary shelter for them. In the ancient times, it was before the establishment of the Celestial Court. At that time, the ancient gods were still the rulers of the heaven and earth, while the human race was rising rapidly. Under the leadership of the human emperor, the human race used a mystic technique to take down the fragments of Panga continent, creating a small landmass like the one in front of them, allowing them to roam the sky above the human race's territory. Right in the center of the landmass, between the mountains and the shores of lakes, the ruins of a few cities could be vaguely seen. Originally, these cities were very large in scale, with city walls measuring several tens of miles in both width and length, and standing over 100 feet tall. It was not hard to tell how magnificent these cities were in the past. But now, these city walls had collapsed to the ground, and all that was left of the houses in the cities were broken walls. The few cities were filled with an air of dilapidation. After that, the heaven and earth fell into chaos. When he said this, Immortal Chuan's description was a little vague. Clearly, he did not know much about this period of history. In short, the human race eventually became the rulers of the heaven and earth, while the immortals soared above the 9 heavens. On the other hand, the war cities of the human race that once roamed the universe were either destroyed or lost in the vast chaotic starry sky, drifting aimlessly in all directions. Instinctively, Wuxia exercised his mystic eyes of universe and gave the surroundings a glance, and he nearly let out a cry. Beside him, Reverend Meow Meow said with a smile, "In short, we have to fight with our true strength, and no cheating is allowed." In this era where natural energy was scarce and resources were scarce, an ancient mansion that could absorb chaotic airflow and transform it into natural energy was a great temptation to all the immortal sections. If Immortal Chuan auctioned it, he could get a lot of benefits. The group of immortals stared quietly at the small landmass. Reverend Meow Meow said with a half-joking and half-serious tone, "Immortal Chuan, I suppose you must have obtained countless benefits from discovering this ancient mansion? Ha ha ha, I wonder if you can show it to us?" Immortal Chuan continued, "In this life and death match, neither side is allowed to use immortal-grade talismans, immortal-grade thunderbolts, or any other consumable offensive magical treasures. Otherwise, they will lose on the spot. Medicinal pills and demon pets are allowed to be used. Of course, fellow immortals, with your keen eyes, if any one of you uses a demon pet whose overall strength does not match its master's, we, the few of us, will judge the immortal sect he belongs to as the loser." A bright flame flickered in the void, stretching for several tens of miles. Immortal Chuan and the other 4 immortal monarchs led the group of immortal officials to clear a path in the front. All the heaven immortals exerted their powers at the same time, forming a long stream of light that flew at top speed in the void. In just a blink of an eye, they had traveled tens of millions of miles, and very soon, they arrived at the edge of Puyuo heavenly realm. Reverend Huilan's lips twitched as he gave Immortal Chuan a glance. After advancing carefully for several tens of thousands of miles, a spherical space with the diameter of about 10,000 miles suddenly appeared amidst the tumbling void. An enormous restrictive force had opened up such a safe space in this chaotic starry sky, which was filled with rich natural energy. A strange golden light filled the surroundings, as a small landmass, measuring about 1,000 miles in both width and length, was hovering quietly in front of them. Everyone's attention was attracted by this space. When no one was paying attention, Wuxia nimbly threw something to the side. Narrowing his eyes, Wuxia knew that Lady Dark Goldwater was an idiot who only focused on cultivation, and knew nothing about anything else. Therefore, she did not have any impression of a mansion of the human race in her memory. Shaking his head, Wuxia turned to Immortal Green Staff and asked in a low voice, "Ancestral Master, what is the origin of this mansion of the human race?" The restrictive force that opened up this spherical space in the chaotic starry sky was coming from the core of that landmass. Chaotic airflows kept rushing into this space, and were transformed by the restrictive force into the normal natural energies of 5 elements. A rich natural energy kept bursting out from the landmass, and the surrounding spherical space seemed to be expanding slowly. All the immortals on the scene had sharp ears. Upon hearing Wuqi's question, Immortal Chuan turned to give Wuqi a look. When he found out that Wuqi was the young man who had given him a large sum of bribes, he immediately had a good impression of him. Immortal Chuan nodded amiably, smiled and said, "If that is the case, I'll tell you the origin of this mansion of the human race. Fellow immortals have brought quite a number of juniors here, and it is a good thing to let them gain some knowledge." Upon hearing Immortal Chuan's words, the group of immortals became excited like flies who had smelled the scent of blood. They fixed their eyes on the disciples of 2 immortal sects, secretly calculating the chances of winning. The sound of a jade bell rang out, as Immortal Chuan smiled and said, "That will be the best. Disciples of Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect, quickly enter the mansion. The match will officially begin at noon 3 days later. During this period of time, you can familiarize yourselves with the terrain, adjust your aura, or simply try your luck and see if you can find some good treasures." Pilgrim Gu He's nagging kept buzzing in Wuqi's spiritual ocean like a fly that could not be killed. Helpless, Wuqi rolled his eyes and sealed off all his 6 senses. Only then did he manage to isolate himself from Pilgrim Gu He's nagging. Some of these mansions had drifted into the depths of the vast and immeasurable chaotic starry sky, while some had drifted for countless years due to the chaotic tide. Occasionally, they would be pushed close to a heavenly realm, and sometimes, they would even break into the normal starry sky of a heavenly realm. Whenever this happened, the lucky immortal monarch in charge of the heavenly realm would receive an unexpected windfall. The price of a mansion was indeed not cheap. Smiling, Immortal Chuan clapped his hands and said, "Come, come, fellow immortal monarchs. Today is the day of the match between Huiling sect and Yuanhua sect. For the sake of a planet of energy stones, both immortal sects will each send out 10 nascent divinity cultivators and 100 nascent soul cultivators to fight in this mansion. No matter what, the disciple of whichever sect can walk out from this mansion in the end will be able to occupy the planet of energy stones for himself." Immortal Chuan nodded his head reservedly, then began to tell them about the origin of the mansion of the human race. Chapter 399. With his cultivation base skyrocketing, Wuqi exercised his mystic eyes of universe, and could see every single blade of grass and every tree on this vast landmass. Just as Immortal Chuan had said, he didn't find any benefits in this place, because Wuqi had also discovered that all the flowers, grasses, and trees on this landmass were ordinary species, and not even a single ginseng could be found. Even if these ordinary flowers, grasses, and trees had absorbed more natural energies over the years, what was the point? Not to mention that these plants had not absorbed much natural energies. Although the natural energies in the vicinity of this landmass were very rich, The natural energies on this landmass were very sparse. Through the observation of Wuqi's mystic eyes of universe, he could see a grayish-white beam of light was absorbing the natural energies in the vicinity at the core of this landmass, which was also the source of the powerful restrictive spells. The restrictive spells of the ancient mansion were very magical, as they could transform the chaotic airflows into natural energies of the 5 elements and release them. Meanwhile, the grayish-white beam of light was absorbing a large amount of natural energies emitted by this landmass. However, it was obvious that this grayish-white beam of light had developed a preliminary spirituality, as it was absorbing natural energies at a certain speed, which didn't affect the operation of the restrictive spells of the ancient mansion. On top of that, it was still able to support the continuous expansion of the spherical space around the mansion. The larger the spherical space was, the larger its surface area would be, and the larger its contact with the chaotic airflows would be. Thus, it would be able to absorb and transform more chaotic airflows. This grayish-white beam of light was very clever. It absorbed 70% of the natural energies transformed by the restrictive spells, and used the remaining 20% to maintain the operation of the restrictive spells. Meanwhile, it released the remaining 10% of natural energies, which gradually expanded the spherical space around it. When Wuqi's mystic eyes of universe swept across the grayish-white beam of light, his heart began to race. This was the innate yin energy of yin and yang, the purest yin energy among the innate yin and yang energies, the source of all the yin energy in the world. The innate chaos was transformed into yin and yang, and the so-called taiji transformed into yin and yang. The grayish-white light was the innate yin qi and the yin and yang qi. It was also one of the 2 yin qi that Wuqi needed to cultivate the 7 foundation elevating technique, which was the next cultivation method of the 7 foundation building technique. Originally, the scroll of stealing had recorded some places that produced innate energies. However, those places were either very far away from the Pilyuo heavenly realm where Wuqi was now, and Wuqi did not have the ability to go there, or they were located in some extremely dangerous places, where even if Wuqi went there, he would be turned into ashes in a puff of smoke. Therefore, Wuqi was so happy to be able to find a wisp of innate yin qi here that he almost shouted out loud. However, under the watchful eyes of all the immortals, over 1,000 heaven immortals were using their Dharma eyes to observe every move made by Wuqi and his companions. Their powerful divine will had locked down everything around them. So how could Wuqi have the chance to collect the innate yin energy? But without the innate yin energy, how was Wuqi going to cultivate the 7 foundation elevating technique to the next level? Currently, he had 10 innate nascent souls in his 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls, and the 7 foundation elevating technique required him to shatter these nascent souls, fuse them with the innate yin and yang energies, and eventually form an innate nascent divinity. No matter what, Wuqi had to get his hands on this yin energy. His eyes darting from side to side, Wuqi pulled Princess Zhongli's tender hand and landed on the ground. The place where Yuan Huasek's disciples landed was next to a small lake. It was a place with lush water plants and beautiful sceneries, making it a good place to set up camp. All the disciples of Yuan Hua sect who participated in the life and death match were from White Cloud Immortal sect, and 70% of them had the surname Jiang. All of them were blood relatives of the same clan, and with the elders of Jiang clan taking care of them, they moved in an orderly manner. Very soon, they began to deploy various defensive mechanisms and traps around the lake. Several hundred miles away, the group of over 100 disciples from Huiling sect was divided into 5 groups, obviously led by 5 peak stage nascent divinity cultivators. They were noisy when they moved, and only after a full 15 minutes after they landed on the ground did they begin to slowly deploy all kinds of defensive formations under the command of a nascent divinity cultivator, who was appointed as the leader. However, it was obvious that there was a grudge between the people of these 5 factions, as their cooperation was sloppy, and their efficiency was shockingly low. High up in the sky, Daoist Qi nodded his head happily and said with a smile, "We now have 70% chance of winning." Meanwhile, Reverend Huilan's face was extremely unsightly. He gave a fierce glare at Immortal Kohi, who was standing next to him with an unsightly expression, and scolded him with a voice transmission. "So, these are the good disciples you found? Look at them, then look at those Yuan Hua sect disciples on the opposite side. If not because I have the confidence to defeat that old fart Yuan Hua, wouldn't our sect have lost a treasured planet of energy stones for no reason? Immortal Kuhi bowed his head helplessly with a long face. He also found it strange that all the disciples of Yuan Hua sect who participated in the life and death match were so obedient. Under the lead of a cultivator, all of them were doing what they were supposed to do, just like a group of filial sons and grandsons carrying out tasks assigned by their patriarch. Immortal Kuhi did not expect that his guess was right. The leader of Yuan Hua sect's disciples in this life and death match was Jiang Xiaoxiao, a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator, commonly known as Daoist Xiao. Furthermore, 70% of the disciples of Jiang clan were his sons and grandsons. As for the other 30% who were not from Jiang clan, most of them had the surname Lu. However, Lu Wuyue, Jiang Xiaoxiao's partner in dual cultivation, was the patriarch of these Lu clansmen, and she was also one of the 10 peak-stage nascent divinity cultivators sent by Yuan Hua sect in this life and death match. With her around, all the cultivators with the surname Lu were naturally very obedient. In less than 2 hours, while the disciples of Huiling sect were still idling, under the command of Daoist Xiao and Lu Wuyue, Wuxia and the others had already constructed a city made of clay, measuring about 1 mile in both width and length. It was surrounded by countless restrictive formations, forming a powerful defensive and early warning system. When everything was done, Daoist Xiao, who always wore a smile on his face, cried out loudly, "Disciples of Yuan Hua sect, listen up! Build your own tents, circulate your energy, and regulate your breath. 3 days later, we will fight a life and death match with the disciples of Huiling sect." All the disciples of Yuan Hua sect answered at the same time. Right in the middle of the city made of clay, they pulled out the white tents they brought with them and pitched several dozens of tents according to the positions of the 8 trigrams. After that, they hid in the tents and began to regulate their breath, trying their best to adjust themselves to the best condition. The group of immortals hovering in the sky shook their heads and shifted their attention away from the disciples of Yuan Hua sect, turning to look at the 110 disciples of Huiling sect with a smile on their faces. These people were still weakly deploying formations and traps. However, the gaps between the various formations they deployed were large enough for a horse to run, and no one knew what the purpose of these restrictive formations was. Some immortals who were not very kind suddenly burst into loud laughter. Without giving any face to Reverend Huilin, they began to make comments on these disciples of Huiling sect who were going to participate in the tournament. There were even some immortals who were mean by nature who simply grabbed their own disciples, using the vastly different performance of the disciples of Huiling sect and Yuan Hua sect as a teaching material to teach their own disciples a lesson, telling them that they must live in harmony and be as smart and capable as the disciples of Yuan Hua sect, and that they must never be like those useless fools from Huiling sect. Reverend Huilin's face turned uglier and uglier. Gradually, his eyes were filled with pale golden blood veins, as he stared at Immortal Kuhi furiously. If he knew this was going to be such a disgrace, he would have asked his own disciples from Huiling sect to participate in the battle. However, those nascent divinity and nascent soul disciples of Huiling sect had suffered a great loss in the battle with Yuan Hua sect. Left with no other choice, Immortal Kuhi had to find a group of outer sect disciples as his disciples. These disciples were the disciples of 4 outer sect disciples, together with a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator from Huiling sect, and over 20 cultivators led by a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator from Huiling sect. But obviously, such a hodgepodge of disciples was not as strong as the disciples of Yuan Hua sect. Jiang Yin? How could that young fellow bring up such a group of obedient and capable disciples? Reverend Huilin's heart felt heavy. For the first time in his life, he was not optimistic about the future of Huiling sect. It was a sign of prosperity for Yuan Hua sect to have such smart, capable, obedient, and organized disciples. On the other hand, why did the disciples of Huiling sect seem to be in a state of decline? On the other hand, those heaven immortals who were part of the top 10 sects in Puyo heavenly realm, like Yuan Hua sect and Huiling sect, were thoughtfully sizing up the disciples of the 2 immortal sections. Their eyes were flickering. Obviously, their attitude towards Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect would undergo a subtle change in the future. Pulling Princess Zhongli's hand, Wuqi squeezed into a spacious and lofty tent. After that, without saying anything, he put his arms around Princess Zhongli and gave her a deep kiss. As Wuqi's eyes flickered, Princess Zhongli, who was very familiar with Wuqi, widened her eyes and rolled her pretty eyes. Then, cooperatively, she tangled her warm little tongue with Wuqi's. As the two of them did this, the few strands of divine sense that were left on their bodies immediately moved away. All the heaven immortals present were reputable figures, and they would never do something like peeping on their juniors. Even if there were some people with bad conduct who liked to do such a thing, they would never make a fool of themselves in front of so many people of similar status. Therefore, with just a deep kiss, Wuqi had created an excellent condition for himself. With a sway of his body, Wuqi took a step back, drilling into the ground like a stream of water. A celestial fiend puppet squeezed out of the ground and transformed into Wuqi's appearance, sitting cross-legged on the ground while groaning, discussing some superficial Tao of talismans with Princess Zhongli. Princess Zhongli was sitting cross-legged in front of the puppet, pretending to be discussing some superficial Tao of talismans. Exercising an innate escape art, Wuqi smoothly avoided 19 layers of defensive mechanisms and quickly approached the core of the landmass, where a cave abode was excavated underground. This was the cave abode that Immortal Chuan said he could not break. The last few layers of defensive mechanisms in the cave abode were indeed very powerful and extremely complicated. Wuqi could see through the ins and outs of these restrictive spells, but he really did not have the ability to open them. Perhaps, the person who constructed them had an overall strength equivalent to an upper-tier gold immortal. There was no way Wuqi could break them. For example, Wuqi knew that he could blow up a stone wall with explosives, but his strength was only equivalent to 1 or 2 grams of explosives. He could only blow up stones for fun, and could not do anything to a stone wall that was 1,000 feet thick. In the face of such powerful defensive mechanisms, one would need a very strong cultivation base to break them. Taking a deep breath, Wuqi carefully hid himself outside one of the powerful defensive mechanisms, releasing just a tiny bit of his innate 5 elements aura. Abruptly, the innate yin energy hidden in the core of the cave abode moved, transforming into a beam of white light and piercing through the layers of defensive mechanisms effortlessly, quickly coming before Wuqi. After briefly sensing the aura emanated from Wuqi, the innate yin energy fused into Wuqi's body without hesitation. A stream of cold air flowed through his body. Wuqi took a deep breath and carefully exercised the 7 foundation establishment technique, guiding the innate yin energy into the innate yin meridians in his arms, making it stay there safely. Right after the innate yin energy fused with the yin meridians, all the energy in Wuqi's body began to surge and surge like a rioting mob. Chapter 400. As soon as the innate yin energy entered his body, Wuqi's fleshly body, which was tempered by the mystic technique of scroll of stealing, immediately went through a tremendous transformation. Every single cell in his body was cheering as they absorbed the subtle aura emanating from the yin energy. In just a brief moment, Wuqi's body, which had become sharp because of practicing the flood dragon transformation technique, and his bulging muscles, had suddenly become smooth and harmonious. An endless stream of yin energy was flowing and circulating in Wuqi's body. With a slight twist of his body, Wuqi's body began to twist and wriggle like water. He took a deep breath, and his body became as hard as steel, while his muscles began to bulge out from under his skin. The innate yin energy was circulating crazily in his body. As the innate yin energy was the most restrained, Wuqi's innate energies of 5 elements were shrinking rapidly like mud under a 10,000-ton hydraulic press. In just the time of 2 to 3 breaths, the innate energies that filled all the meridians in Wuqi's body had been compressed to 1/10 of their original volume. The energy contained in each unit of innate energies had increased by 10 times. Perhaps the power of an ordinary fire thunder spell cast by Wuqi was comparable to the raging thunder strike, which was unleashed by a peak-stage nascent divinity cultivator, by consuming a huge amount of energy. On top of that, as the innate yin energy was restrained and hidden, Wuqi's aura had also become faintly discernible. and was even comparable to that of an ordinary human. It was stated in the Scroll of Stealing that only when one had absorbed the innate yin energy, could all the escape techniques of hiding one's whereabouts in the Scroll of Stealing be cultivated to the ultimate stage. Now, even if Wuxia did not use the mystic technique to restrain his aura, as long as he walked into a crowd of mortals, ordinary immortals would think that he was just a mortal. Feeling the magical transformation in his body, Wuxia shook his head in a happy yet troubled manner, and breathed out a long sigh. His innate energies had been reduced by 90%. Even with the speed of his 10 nascent souls breathing at the same time, it would still take him some time to replenish the consumed innate energies. Of course, this was a good thing. But after a few days of hard work, his meridians would be filled up again. Unwilling to give up, Wuxia looked at the ancient restrictive spell that was emitting a faint bronze light like an iron wall in front of him. He shook his head and quickly returned to the ground. The Scroll of Stealing did mention all sorts of tricks to solve this kind of restrictive spell that was left behind from the ancient times. However, currently Wuxia did not have the ability to break it, so he could only look at it and sigh. But with this innate yin qi, it was worth it, everything was worth it. As long as he could find the innate yin and yang qi, he would be able to cultivate the 7 foundation elevating technique, using the innate yin and yang qi as the heaven and earth furnace and his own body as the cauldron, crushing his nascent soul that contained his 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls, and forging his innate nascent divinity in an unprecedented way. An innate primordial spirit that had fused with the innate yin and yang and the 5 elements was in existence comparable to an immortal soul. Once his innate primordial spirit was formed, Wuxia had officially embarked on a path of cultivation that was completely different from the current cultivation world. The end of this path would lead straight to the true great Tao of the heaven and earth, but it would depend on whether Wuxia had the luck to reach that point. As the innate yin qi entered his body, the hasik in Wuxia's spiritual ocean let out a joyful sigh and said, "Little fellow, your luck is really wonderful. Perhaps I should address you as master in advance? As long as you possess the overall strength of a gold immortal, I'll be at your beck and call, and I'll never regret it." Carefully and stealthily, the hasik extracted a thread of the innate yin qi that was flowing in Wuxia's body. After that, it let out a joyful cry and fused the extremely magical energy into its own soul, then fell into a deep sleep comfortably in Wuxia's spiritual ocean. To Wuxia, the loss of this thread of innate yin qi was nothing. The innate yin qi that had fused with his 7 profound yin meridians was constantly absorbing the innate energy essence exhaled by Wuxia's nascent soul, transforming it into new innate yin qi. Bringing with him a comfortable and cool feeling, Wuxia leaped back to the ground, and soundlessly fused with the celestial fiend puppet. He smiled and nodded at Princess Zhonglu, then pulled her hand. Once again, both of them were entangled with each other. Once again, several dozens of divine wills swept across the tent, then quickly retreated as if they had just seen a ghost. 3 days later, these immortals no longer sent their divine wills near Wuxia and Princess Zhongli's tent. The small fireball hovered high up in the sky, and everyone's shadows were right under their feet. Noon had arrived. Immortal Chuan's loud cry was heard coming from the void. The life and death match between Yuanhua sect and Huiling sect has officially begun. The winner of both sides will occupy that energy stone planet. In this match, no one-time use items such as talismans or Yin thunderbombs are allowed to be used, and there are no other restrictions. In the end, the immortal sect with a disciple who survived will be the winner. Daoist Xiao gave a long and sonorous cry, shooting up into the sky together with a green sword beam. Looking at the direction where the disciples of Huiling sect had set up their camp, he cried out sternly, "Fellow Taoists from Huiling sect, is there anyone who dares to fight me?" It was just a distance of several hundred miles. Even though some cultivators did not have the ability to see through this distance with naked eyes, the divine will of peak stage nascent soul cultivators was more than enough to cover this space. Therefore, when Daoist Xiao shouted out his challenge, several dozens of divine wills from Huiling sect had already enveloped the area. All the disciples of Yuanhua sect who were participating in the life and death match flew up into the sky. Lu Wuyue, who had white hair but a face as beautiful as a young girl, hovered side by side in midair with Daoist Xiao. Laughing loudly, she said, I'm Wuxia. Is there any fellow Taoist who is willing to give me some advice? The other 8 peak stage nascent divinity cultivators of Yuanhua sect flew up into the sky one after another, hovering in midair and shouting, We'll be waiting for you, fellow Taoists. Before their voices could fade away, a loud boom of wind and flame was heard coming from a distance. A small hill, about 1 mile tall and several miles in circumference, suddenly left the ground and flew up into the sky. The underside of the hill was surrounded by a strong, pitch-black wind, while a raging fire was burning on top of it. The scorching temperature of the flame turned the entire hill red, as if it would melt at any time. Large fireballs broke off from the hill and fell down, flying at top speed towards Wuxia and his company, bringing with them a strong gust of wind. It took the time it took to finish a meal to fly tens of miles high up into the sky, and only then did it arrive above the earthen city built by Wuxia and his company. The strong, dark wind under the hill dissipated abruptly, and the hill began to fall back down. A bright red light towered up into the sky from the top of the hill, and a great amount of heat burst out from the red flame. It made Wuxia and his company feel as if they were in a furnace. While Daoist Xiao and his company were about to fight back, Lord Xianxing had already cried out joyfully, Fellow disciples, let this little dragon show me what he is capable of. Laughing wildly, Lord Xianxing suddenly transformed into his true form of a flood dragon. A black flood dragon mixed with some golden scales soared up into the sky, his over 3,000 feet long body wriggling up into the sky, then slapped forcefully on the hill with one of his claws. A tremendous hidden force exploded out, and the magic power attached to the hill was shattered by the claw. The huge hill was sent flying backward for some distance, and was about to fall down to the ground. But before the hill could fall, Lord Xianxing had already opened his mouth and recited a few incantations. A tornado rose from the lake next to him, rolling up the flaming hill, and sending it flying towards Huiling Sect's base. The speed of the tornado was a few times faster than the dark gale coming from underneath the small hill. Within the time it took to finish a pot of tea, the small hill had arrived right above the Huiling Sect's base. Along with a wild whistling noise, the rapidly spinning small hill smashed down forcefully. The wind had fanned the flames, and more than half of the hill had been melted. Just when a few nascent soul disciples of Huiling Sect sprung up into the sky, preparing to roll the hill back like Lord Xianxing did, Lord Xianxing suddenly glared at them and unleashed an invisible force. The hill exploded abruptly, turning into several hundred huge balls of lava and falling down to the ground. Deafening booms of explosions echoed out one after another, as Huiling Sect's base suddenly turned into a sea of flames. Columns of flame and smoke that reached several miles high could be seen everywhere. The result of Huiling Sect's disciples slacking off and not meticulously constructing their defensive system was now reflected, as nearly half of their defensive formations were destroyed by Lord Xianxing with just one attack. 7 early-stage nascent soul disciples of Huiling Sect were knocked flying away by the explosion. Their defensive magical treasures were ripped to shreds, and blood was spraying all over their bodies. Suddenly, a huge catfish flood dragon sprung down from the sky. The catfish flood dragon, who had grown to over 3,000 feet long, opened her mouth and swallowed the 7 nascent soul cultivators. After that, she opened her mouth and sprayed out a stream of black water, pushing the dozens of nascent soul cultivators far away. Their defensive magical treasures flickered and flickered, producing a series of explosive noises. Wuxia shook his head as he watched. As Patriarch Yuanhua feared that his disciples would suffer a loss, he had given each of them a middle-grade spirit weapon and a lower-grade defensive outfit. Now all the cultivators on the scene were equipped with 2 spirit items, and their overall offensive and defensive strength had improved by at least a few times. But what was going on with Huiling Sect? They were all shabby lower-grade and middle-grade magical treasures, the kind that were poorly crafted. But after being smashed by Lord Xianxing and Catfish Flood Dragon, they were actually thrown into confusion? While Wuxia was shaking his head and sighing, the nascent divinity cultivators of Huiling Sect finally struck. 10 beams of cold light shot out, flying straight towards Lord Xianxing and Catfish Flood Dragon. Judging from the luster of the beams and the faintly discernible spirit pressure, it was obvious that they were 10 spirit items. Wuxia nodded his head inwardly. That made sense. How could Huiling sect be so poor? Perhaps it was because Reverend Huilin was too stingy. High up in the sky, Reverend Huilin's face turned unsightly. He was indeed too stingy, as he had only given 10 nascent divinity disciples a set of excellent spirit items, and ignored all the nascent soul disciples who participated in the match. In his opinion, it was these 10 nascent divinity disciples who would decide the outcome of the match, and those nascent soul disciples were just cannon fodders who could buy time. Why would they be given excellent spirit items? As the nascent divinity cultivators of Huiling sect struck, Catfish Flood Dragon and Lord Xianxing Chi-Chi let out a dragon roar as they stepped on dark clouds and retreated at top speed. Lord Xianxing opened his mouth and sprayed out several dozens of layers of water shields in front of him. Meanwhile, Catfish Flood Dragon kept spraying out black waves of water. The waves brought with them a bone-piercing coldness and smashed onto the bright beams formed by the spirit items, sending up a large sheet of cold air. In just a few blinks of an eye, Catfish Flood Dragon and Lord Xianxing were forced to flee. Together with 8 other peak stage nascent divinity cultivators, Daoist Xiao and Lu Wuyue hastily charged forward, while the rest of Yuan Hua sect's cultivators formed into formations and charged forward as well. Wu Qi let out a long cry as he excitedly pulled Princess Zhang Li's little hand and rushed forward. The spirit breeding ring flickered with a bright light, as Gold Horn and Silver Horn rushed out with a deafening hiss. 2 beams of red and white intertwined with each other as they shot out. A miserable howl echoed out as a nascent divinity cultivator from Huiling sect had his body pierced through. All the immortals in the sky looked over in horror, while Reverend Huilin cried out wildly, "Cheater! That guy cheated!" Chapter 401. This doesn't make sense. Absolutely not. Reverend Huilin cried out with his saliva flying all over the place. 5 immortal monarchs, please be careful. The pair of wings on the back of these 2 great pythons is definitely an ancient bloodline. Given their huge size, they are definitely flood dragons, and they have formed their nascent divinities. They are 2 demon immortals of nascent divinity realm. How could a mere nascent soul disciple own such demon pets? Cheating. They are definitely the left hand of Yuan Hua sect, Reverend Huilin said with a righteous tone. They know they cannot defeat us, Huiling sect. That's why they resorted to such a dirty trick. While Reverend Huilin was shouting and protesting, Gold Horn and Silver Horn had already shot out dozens of red and white beams in a row, killing 7 nascent divinity cultivators of Huiling sect on the spot, while the other 3 were covered in wounds and looked like they were going to fall to the ground soon. Even Daoist Emol Wan's Smoke Luan shield could not withstand the raging flame and cold beams unleashed by the brothers, let alone the spirit items controlled by these nascent divinity cultivators. Wherever the red and white beams went, spirit items were broken and fleshly bodies were damaged. Gold Horn and Silver Horn had shown their mighty power, causing Huiling sect's cultivators to flee with their arms around their heads, blood and flesh flying in all directions. The brothers and Catfish Flood Dragon opened their big mouths and kept swallowing the blood and flesh that filled the sky. They seemed to be enjoying the feast, but little did they know that Reverend Huilin was already protesting loudly from above. Nevertheless, Reverend Huilin was just protesting, as he was too lazy to save his disciples. What a bunch of useless fools. Let them all die. As long as he could confirm that Yuan Hua sect's cultivators were cheating, Huiling sect would win the match. So, what if a few of their disciples died? Wu Qi followed closely behind Gold Horn and Silver Horn. 2 flying swords wheeled and danced in the air, emanating a large sheet of dark light. All of a sudden, a sword beam flashed, as it pierced through the defensive magical treasure of an early-stage nascent soul cultivator in front of him, piercing through his forehead. Suddenly, Gold Horn rushed up, coiled his long tongue, and swallowed the early-stage nascent soul cultivator into his stomach. Initially, Wu Qi only had the sword of Greedy Wolf. However, as he was appreciated by Patriarch Yuan Hua, he was given a flying sword of upper-grade spirit item level, the Xuanhao. This flying sword was made from the cold jade of the seabed, and tempered with 10,000 years of xianbing. It was a pure Yin water attribute flying sword. Just now Wu Qi had obtained the innate Yin Qi, and the 5 elements energy in his body carried a trace of extreme Yin aura. Coupled with the sword-controlling method in the Xianin water scripture, he could control the Xuanhao sword with ease and fluency. The sword of greedy wolf darted back and forth, clashing head-on with the flying swords of those Huiling sect cultivators. Every single time, it would break the flying swords and magical treasures of those Huiling sect cultivators. As for the Xuanhao sword, it brought up a large waterfall and created several tens of large and small whirlpools in the air, pulling all the cultivators of Huiling sect into them one after another. The huge Yin force silently twisted and pressed down, crushing the defensive treasures of those cultivators, or those nascent soul cultivators themselves, who could not bear the huge pressure, fainted with blood flowing out of their 7 orifices. No matter it was those cultivators whose defensive magical treasures were destroyed, or those who fainted, they would end up in the stomachs of Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Catfish Flood Dragon. However, the one who was even more efficient than Wuqi was Princess Zhangli. A 5-colored divine gleam flickered in her eyes, while an invisible force kept echoing in the air. From time to time, cultivators of Huiling sect would be controlled by Princess Zhangli with a mystic technique, and obediently put away their defensive magical treasures. Therefore, in broad daylight, there would be a perfect thunderbolt striking down from the sky, striking the dazed cultivator and turning him half-cooked, while emitting an aroma of human flesh that could make one's scalp go numb. On the contrary, these cultivators who were struck by thunderbolts were especially welcomed by Gold Horn and Silver Horn. Later on, the 2 brothers would spend a lot of time around Princess Zhangli, snatching and devouring these half-cooked cultivators. In just 15 minutes, the disciples of Huiling sect had suffered a crushing defeat, as over 70 of them were killed by Yuanhua sect's swords. However, when they fought back before their death, they were all blocked by the lower-grade defensive spirit items carried by Yuanhua sect's disciples. Even after fighting for so long, not a single Yuanhua sect disciple had a scratch on their skin. Reverend Huilin cried out sternly in the sky. 5 immortal monarchs, the evidence is conclusive, and the facts are clear. Yuanhua sect's disciples are cheating. All the immortals nearby looked at Reverend Huilin contemptuously. Since you know Yuanhua sect's disciples are cheating, why didn't you save your own disciples first? After all, they are the disciples of Huiling sect. If you were to rescue them, you would at most lose a dozen of your men, unlike now, where most of them have been slaughtered by Wuqi and his men, and only about 20 lucky disciples are still fleeing in panic. Obviously, he wanted to check the relationship between Gold Horn and Silver Horn, as well as Wuqi. He wanted to make sure that Yuanhua sect did not cheat. Only then he could decide the outcome of the match. At this point in time, only 3 nascent divinity cultivators were left standing among the disciples of Huiling sect. However, they were all covered in blood. Reverend Gu He stepped forward and separated both sides. Immediately, the 3 nascent divinity cultivators from Huiling sect fell to the ground, panting like mortals. One after another, all the immortals descended to the ground, surrounding Gold Horn and Silver Horn curiously. They were frowning, and some of them even stole glances at Wuqi with different thoughts in their minds. Wuqi could sense the malice in these people's hearts, and he knew that they were coveting Gold Horn and Silver Horn. However, Wuqi was not afraid of them. As long as he did not leave Green Cliff Planet easily, who could touch even a single hair of his? Immortal Chuan took a few rounds around Gold Horn and Silver Horn, nodded his head, and said with a smile, "They are indeed extraordinary. I think these 2 strange pythons are the legendary dragon pythons of fire and ice, right? I've read about them in the rare books found in the Celestial Court. Little friend Wuqi, what a great fortune you have." Wuqi cupped his fist and bowed to the Reverend, then said with a deep voice, "You flatter me, immortal monarch. Wuqi is just lucky." Knowing what these immortals wanted to investigate, Wuqi beckoned at Gold Horn and Silver Horn, then said with a smile, "Gold Horn, Silver Horn, reveal your nascent divinity, and let these senior immortals see the relationship between you and me." With a sway of his body, a large sheet of clouds rushed out from around him, and a white cloud carried Wuqi's fake nascent soul as it flew out. As this fake nascent soul was cultivating White Cloud Immortal Sect's Energy Unity Mystic technique, it was surrounded by a large sheet of light clouds. In the hands of the fake nascent soul, There were two beams of red and white light hovering in midair. Gold Horn and Silver Horn bowed their heads. A beam of red and a beam of white light shot out from between their brows, transforming into the shadows of two great pythons and slithering quickly around Wuxia. Gold Horn and Silver Horn's nascent divinity was strong and ferocious. One was shrouded in raging flame, while the other was shrouded in icy wind. Inside and outside their nascent divinities, countless restrictive runes could be vaguely seen. As all the Heaven Immortals were experts in this field, they could tell with just one glance that Gold Horn and Silver Horn's nascent divinities were resonating with the light on Wuqi's palms. Obviously, their nascent divinities were completely controlled by Wuxia. Reverend Huilin cried out sternly, "This does not prove that Wuxia has subdued these two great pythons." Wuxia sighed, shook his head and said, "I can swear to the heaven that Gold Horn and Silver Horn are demon pets that I personally subdued. Actually, if Gold Horn and Silver Horn were demon immortals of Heaven Immortal Realm, Wuxia would be suspected of cheating. However, they had just formed their nascent divinities, and all the senior immortals could tell with just one glance that they had just formed their nascent divinities a few days ago." Cheating? Where did that come from? Daoist Chi snorted coldly, gave Reverend Huilin a sidelong glance and said mockingly, "Could it be that Senior has no choice but to twist words and force logic?" Reverend Huilin bellowed furiously, "I can't lose? Daoist Chi, how dare you?" Immortal Chuan and the other few immortal monarchs exchanged a glance, then shook their heads at the same time. Clearly, Reverend Huilin was not a man of integrity. It was his own disciples who did not live up to his expectations, and it was fine if they lost, but why did he have to accuse Wuxia of cheating? Nevertheless, no matter how they looked at it, there was nothing doubtful about Wuqia's subduing of these two great pythons. It could only be said that Wuxia was too lucky, and that was why he could get such a great reward. Without giving Reverend Huilin any chance to say more, Immortal Chuan cried out in a deep voice, "Yuan Hua sect is the winner of this match. No more objections." He gave Reverend Huilin a glance, whose face had turned livid, and said coldly, "The second match will now begin. Patriarch Yuan Hua of Yuan Hua sect and Reverend Huilin of Huiling sect, please get ready for the duel." Reverend Huilin's expression flickered, and he suddenly burst into a loud laughter. "Yuan Hua, old fogey, where are you?" Reverend Huilin became arrogant again. The smile had returned to his face, as if the crushing defeat just now had never happened. Chapter 402. Wuxia stared coldly at Reverend Huilin, who was acting so arrogant and domineering. How could a guy like him cultivate to such a level? Reverend Huilin paid no attention to Wuqia's meaningful gaze. He just raised his head and cried out loudly, "Yuan Hua, come out and fight me." His sonorous voice echoed across 10,000 miles in all directions. If Patriarch Yuan Hua were in the space where the ancient mansion was located, he would definitely be able to hear his voice. But even after Reverend Huilin had called out dozens of times, Patriarch Yuan Hua still did not show up. Reverend Huilin became even more excited. He stared at Immortal Chuan and said loudly, "Immortal Monarch, Yuan Hua is not here. Could it be that he is too scared to show up? Does that mean I've won this match?" Immortal Chuan and the other few immortal monarchs exchanged a glance, hesitating and not daring to make a decision. This matter was related to the ownership of the headquarters of two immortal sects, and with so many immortals watching, if the patriarchs of the two immortal sects didn't have a serious fight to decide the ownership of the Green Cliff Star and Huangqiao Star, the few immortal monarchs present on the scene would have a bad reputation. For example, would people say that these few immortal monarchs had been bribed by Huiling sect and were intentionally siding with Huiling sect? The Celestial Court had a strict discipline. Although all immortal monarchs were very motivated, if they wanted to be promoted, their reputation as an official was also an important test. It was for this reason that Immortal Chuan mediated the conflict between Huiling sect and Yuan Hua sect. If several dozens of heaven immortals were killed suddenly in the heavenly realms under his rule, it would definitely leave a heavy mark on his personal file. At least, he would be accused of not having a good control over the situation, and it would be a great obstacle to his future promotion. Every promotion of an immortal monarch represented real benefits. Heavenly realms with richer natural energy, larger territories, more abundant natural resources, and more immortals would be rewarded with corresponding immortal stones and immortal pills. More importantly, with every promotion, they would be able to receive guidance from those almighty experts in the celestial court, and be able to visit those almighty experts' immortal abodes to listen to the teachings of the great Tao. That was the most important thing. Therefore, Immortal Chuan and the others didn't dare to make a rash decision. After all, this matter concerned two great immortal sects. Wuxia looked at Immortal Chuan and the others, who had their eyeballs darting from side to side, and he immediately felt a great joy in his heart. The status of these people was similar to the village cadres on Earth. The competition between the two immortal sects was like a group fight between the people of two villages. This would have a huge impact on their performance evaluation. A bowl of water must be leveled, otherwise no one would know what would happen next. Coldly looking at Immortal Chuan and the others, Wuxia recalled the plan they came up with in the Green Cliff Mountain. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the cloud path that he came from. At this time there should be some movement on the wind-blown plains of Tsangtu planet, right? Could Taoist men succeed? Upon thinking of this, Wuxia turned to look at the group of eminent cloud sects Heaven Immortals. As the number one immortal sect in Puyo Heavenly Realm, Eminent Cloud Sect had a total of 42 Heaven Immortals. However, there were only 11 of them here today. Of course, as the founding ancestral master of Eminent Cloud Sect, Reverend Yun was sitting cross-legged on the back of a large black crane, looking at Reverend Huilin with a smile on his face. However, Wuxia felt that there was something wrong with the aura emanating from Reverend Yun. Could it be that the prophecy had really come? Seeing that Immortal Chuan and the other immortal monarchs did not say a word, Reverend Huilin could not help but shout angrily. Immortal monarchs, since Patriarch Yuan Hua doesn't have the courage to fight, you should declare me the winner. According to the bet, this Green Cliff planet should belong to Huiling's sect. Immortal Chuan cleared his throat. While frowning, he was about to say something, but suddenly, a stream of light cut through the chaotic airflow and broke into the ball-shaped space. In just a blink of an eye, Patriarch Yuan Hua had arrived with blood all over his body. The pale golden blood on Patriarch Yuan Hua's body had not dried yet, and was still emanating a very strong wave of immortal energy. Obviously, the blood had just flowed out from the body of an immortal. Patriarch Yuan Hua flicked his long sleeve and wiped away the blood. He coughed violently, then laughed and said with a hoarse voice, "Reverend Huilin, you can't wait any longer? Well then, let's do it. Immortal monarchs, please be my witnesses. If Reverend Huilin is killed by my sword today, Huangqiao planet will belong to Yuan Hua sect." Patriarch Yuan Hua coughed again. Golden blood was seen trickling down from the corner of his mouth. Laughing fiercely, he said, "Huilin, come, let's fight to the death." With a wave of his right hand, a misty green cloud shot out from his fingertip, transforming into an immortal sword that looked like it was condensed from clouds and mist. It was faintly discernible, as if it did not have a real body, and began wheeling rapidly around him. This was the prime immortal item, the Cloud Shadow Sword, which Patriarch Yuan Hua had spent several hundred periods of painstaking effort to gradually craft and temper after transcending his tribulation and becoming an immortal. When the sword beam was unleashed, Patriarch Yuan Hua's body turned into a layer of mist, and it was difficult to lock onto him with divine will. Immortal Chuan gave the blood stains on Patriarch Yuan Hua's body a thoughtful look, his brows knitted into a tight frown. With a serious expression, he cried out in a deep voice, "Fine, let's fight according to the bet. No matter who wins, if there is any conflict in the future, it can only be limited to the matter between Yuan Hua sect and Huiling sect. The conflict is not allowed to expand." What Immortal Chuan meant was very clear. If you want to fight and kill each other, that is your freedom. You can take revenge on each other in the future, but you are not allowed to call your friends and make the matter worse. There was a hint of threat in his tone. If you dare to make a scene, don't blame me for using the force of the celestial court to suppress you. Patriarch Yuan Hua cupped his fist and bowed to Immortal Chuan, agreeing to his words. On the other side, Reverend Huilin leaped back about 100 miles. He rubbed his palms together, and a brilliant and strong golden beam shot out from his palms. It was a strange-shaped immortal sword with an ancient design, looking as if it was forged entirely from gold, and was constantly bursting with a large sheet of golden flame. This immortal sword was as wide as a palm, and as long as 7 feet. From the tip of the sword to the hilt, a row of 13 fist-sized prismatic crystals were inlaid. Every single crystal flickered with a dazzling red light, and the flames of the light expanded and contracted like the heart of a living being. Wuxia sucked in a cold breath as he looked at the immortal sword. It was an upper-grade immortal sword, a powerful immortal item that could only be crafted by heaven immortals of at least 18th tier or above, and the item spirit in it had a power equal to at least that of an 18th tier heaven immortal, with Reverend Huilan's overall strength that was equal to, or even slightly weaker than Patriarch Yuanhua. How was it possible for him to control an immortal sword of at least 18th tier or above? Could it be that Reverend Huilan had the same innate energy as Wuxia, and was able to attract an upper-grade immortal item? It did not make sense. When the golden immortal sword was unleashed, the weather immediately changed, and the scorching aura forced all the immortals to retreat. They stared at Reverend Huilan in surprise, and suddenly understood why he had the courage to rush to Green Cliff Planet and fight Patriarch Yuanhua, and even bet the foundation of his sect on it. With this immortal sword in his hand, Reverend Huilan had the right to do so. It was like a baby challenging another child with a rocket launcher, and it was a sure win. The problem was, when all the heaven immortals present scanned Reverend Huilan with their divine will, they found out that he only had a cultivation base of 28th tier heaven immortal. How could he control an upper-grade immortal sword like this? Immortal items had their own spirits, and they were the proudest of all. Without the corresponding overall strength, how could they be controlled by someone? With the golden immortal sword in his hand, Reverend Huilan laughed complacently and said, "Yuanhua, I'll kill you with my sword today." Yuanhua sect. Hee. Reverend Huilan laughed hideously, and the meaning behind his words was clear. As long as he killed Patriarch Yuanhua, Yuanhua sect would no longer need to exist. With an immortal sword that was above 18th tier, Reverend Huilan's overall strength had increased by more than 10 times. He was determined to wipe out Yuanhua sect, and the energy stone planet that the two immortal sects were fighting over would definitely belong to Huiling sect. Although the immortal monarchs of the celestial court were nominally ruling all the heavenly realms, the only decisive factor between immortals was still the overall strength. The strong would win, and the weak would be prey to the strong. This was the eternal truth of immortal cultivators. Wuxia stared coldly at Reverend Huilan, who was acting arrogantly. No wonder he had such a strong confidence to fight Yuanhua sect. But he reckoned it was not too long ago that he obtained the golden immortal sword. Otherwise, Huiling sect would not have fought Yuanhua sect for over 1,000 years, and still could not decide the ownership of the energy stone planet. According to the time, Reverend Huilan must have obtained the immortal sword just a few days before Wuxia came to Piluo heavenly realm. The few immortal monarchs fixed their eyes on the immortal sword in Reverend Huilan's hand, their faces grave. It was especially true for immortal Chuan, whose face was alternating between blue and pale. With such a powerful immortal sword, Reverend Huilan's overall strength had surpassed immortal Chuan's. In the future, it would be difficult for immortal Chuan to manage Huiling sect. The situation was giving him a headache. Among all the heavenly realms, there were some extremely powerful immortal sects, whose overall strength was so strong that they could ignore the laws of the celestial court. Those immortal monarchs who were in charge of the celestial court were living like their grandchildren, without any power or glory. Immortal Chuan really did not want to become an unlucky fellow like them. However, the golden immortal sword was so powerful that the group of immortals couldn't even stand firmly before it. How were they supposed to fight? While all kinds of thoughts were tumbling in everyone's mind, Patriarch Yuanhua suddenly laughed and said, "Huilan, it seems the item spirit of this immortal sword is severely injured, and has fallen into a deep sleep, right? Otherwise, how could you control it?" Reverend Huilan nodded and said, "Yes. When I found it, it was covered in wounds, and its item spirit was on the verge of shattering. I suppose some mighty immortal fell in a battle with someone, and his immortal item accidentally fell into Piluo heavenly realm. Luckily, I found it. Waving the immortal sword casually, Reverend Huilin let out a long laugh and said, Yuan Hua, if your Yuan Hua sect can be merged with Huiling sect, I can. Patriarch Yuan Hua shook his head. Without paying any attention to Reverend Huilin, he carefully and respectfully pulled out a strip of cloth from under his sleeve, measuring 6 inches long and 2 fingers wide. It looked like a strip of cloth that was casually torn off from his clothes. A few runes were scribbled on the strip of cloth with pale golden blood, and it was emanating a very faint wave of immortal energy. Patriarch Yuan Hua gave Reverend Huilin a cold look, then pointed his finger at the strip of cloth. Suddenly, it burst into flames. A tiny beam of golden light shot out from the strip of cloth, crossing 100 miles of void and lightly falling onto Reverend Huilin's body. Amidst the terrified gazes of all the immortals, Reverend Huilin suddenly vanished into thin air. Chapter 403. The group of immortals was struck with terror, and they took another big step back. Annihilated, completely annihilated. A mighty 28th tier heaven immortal was actually destroyed by Patriarch Yuan Hua with that shabby-looking strip of cloth, leaving not even a broken soul behind. Such a power was simply too frightening. Without saying a word, Patriarch Yuan Hua sprung forward, grabbed the hilt of the golden immortal sword, and quickly sent his divine will into it. Suddenly, numerous runes lit up on the surface of the immortal sword, and a faint buzzing could be heard coming out of it. In just a blink of an eye, Patriarch Yuan Hua's divine will had approached the core of the complicated formation diagram, and vaguely came into contact with the item spirit, which was lying dormant in the sword's core. The surrounding immortals suddenly came to their senses. No matter how Reverend Huilin was annihilated, and no matter what method Patriarch Yuan Hua used to suddenly destroy his soul, this immortal sword was simply too tempting. Although the item spirit of an immortal sword of 18th tier and above was severely injured, it could easily recover with some time and energy. With this immortal sword, they would be able to establish the foundation of being the #1 immortal sect in Puyo Heavenly Realm and the surrounding heavenly realms. Several hundred immortals struck at the same time. Fellow immortal Yuan Hua, please let us have a look at this sword, cried Chi-Chi. Suddenly, the void around Patriarch Yuan Hua shattered, as several hundred huge hands formed from immortal energies reached out and grabbed towards him. But, as these huge hands were fighting and struggling with each other, they revealed a big flaw. The Cloud Shadow Sword flashed and brought Patriarch Yuan Hua out of the void at top speed. Patriarch Yuan Hua gave a long cry and cried out, Disciples of Yuan Hua sect, let's go! Immortal Chuan, that Huangqiao planet belongs to Yuan Hua sect now. Daoist Qi flicked his sleeve. A plume of smoke towered up into the sky, wrapping up Wu Qi and all the disciples who participated in the life and death match, then transformed into a beam of light and fled along with Patriarch Yuan Hua. With the golden immortal sword in hand, Patriarch Yuan Hua flew in the front. Wherever the golden light passed, the chaotic airflow opened up a path, just enough for the disciples who were chasing after him to escape. However, the chaotic airflow had a bizarre nature and was extremely heavy. Even with the golden immortal sword in his hand clearing the way, Patriarch Yuan Hua's speed had dropped by at least 100 times. Although the disciples of Yuan Hua sect fled quickly, they were soon caught up by the immortals behind them. At the very front was Guru Gu He, who had a solemn appearance and was emitting a faint golden light. The string of Buddha beads in his left hand suddenly transformed into hundreds of soft and translucent Buddha lights and shot out, smashing towards Wu Qi and the others like a storm. Guru Gu He cried out in a deep voice, Fellow immortal Yuan Hua, this sword is fated with the Buddhist League. Please put it down and form a good relationship with the Buddhist League. A deep, muffled chanting that sounded like thunder was heard coming from within the over 100 balls of Buddhist light. The disciples of Yuan Hua sect who only possessed the cultivation base of nascent soul realm felt their heads tremble, and one after another, they rolled their eyes and fainted. Daoist Xiao and the rest of the 10 nascent divinity disciples were trembling uncontrollably. Although they were protected by the cloud unleashed by Daoist Qi, their nascent divinities were still shaking violently inside their bodies, nearly disintegrating into nothingness. Guru Gu he even slapped his forehead, unleashing a beam of Buddhist light that transformed into a huge claw shaped like the sharp claw of a great rock, grabbing towards Patriarch Yuan Hua. All the immortals could see that a large sheet of golden flame had burst out from the immortal sword in Patriarch Yuan Hua's hand. It looked like Patriarch Yuan Hua was on the verge of wiping out the divine will Reverend Huilin had left in the sword, and was about to brand his own divine will on the severely injured item spirit. Once Patriarch Yuan Hua took control of this severely injured immortal sword, with his cultivation base of peak stage 28th tier, his overall strength would skyrocket by a few times. Even if the few immortal monarchs joined forces, they would still be no match for Patriarch Yuan Hua. Therefore, they had to stop Patriarch Yuan Hua from refining the immortal sword now. As long as they could delay him for a moment and interrupt his refinement process, they would be able to seize the immortal sword with the joint attack of over 1,000 heaven immortals. As for who the immortal sword would belong to in the end, there must be a lucky one, right? And all the immortals felt that they were the lucky one. At that moment, Wuxia suddenly gave a long cry and waved his left hand. Countless dragon-scaled golden beams shot up into the sky, flying towards the over 100 balls of Buddhist light that Guru Gu he had thrown down with a jarring whistle. The dragon-scaled golden lights hit the Buddha light intensely, causing the Buddha light to burst into muffled bangs. The dragon-scaled golden lights shattered into pieces, but the Buddha light that was falling from above was also deflected by the huge impact of the dragon-scaled golden lights. More than 100 Buddha lights plunged into the chaotic airflow not far away, and disappeared after a turn. Guru Gu he was so angry that he nearly coughed blood. The string of Buddhist beads was a precious treasure that he had been carrying with him since he began his cultivation. After being strengthened by his Buddhist power and willpower for countless years, it had become one with his mind, and its power was not weaker than ordinary immortal items. But after being struck by Wuqi's attack, the string of Buddhist beads was swept away by the chaotic airflow. Not even a primordial immortal could find such a small string of Buddhist beads in the chaotic starry sky. It was a well-known fact that Buddhist cultivators had always lived a poor life. Usually, they only had 2 or 3 Buddhist treasures, which were the condensation of all their Buddhist power and willpower. They did not pay much attention to other worldly possessions. As for Guru Gu he only had this string of Buddhist beads, which was the only Buddhist item he carried with him. All his years of cultivation had been spent on this string of Buddhist beads. Despite the fact that Guru Gu he's cultivation had reached a certain level, he was still so angry that he began to curse out loud. "Damn you, Junior! Give me back my treasure!" Guru Gu he furrowed his brows. He was too lazy to chase after Patriarch Yuan Hua. Instead, he waved his right hand, shooting out a huge claw that looked like the sharp claws of a rock towards Wuqi's head. If the claw managed to grab hold of Wuqi, with the gap in their overall strength, Wuqi would definitely have his bones broken and tendons torn, killing him instantly. At this moment, Guru Gu he did not care whether Wuqi was fated with the Buddhist League or not. Wuqi snorted coldly and clenched his jaws tightly. He felt a throbbing pain in his heart. The Earth Element Dragon Scale Shield was unleashed just now, and at least 10,000 dragon scales were shattered by the Buddhist beads. It was a precious treasure crafted using the dragon scales that he looted from Wayneeing Dragon King's ancestral grave. After losing 10,000 dragon scales, both the offensive and defensive strength of the Earth Element Dragon Scale Shield had dropped by 40%. "Old bald donkey, give me back my dragon scales." Wuqi was so angry that he jumped up and down violently. He glared at Guru Gu he, then opened his erect eye. Abruptly, over 100 blinding purple thunderbolts shot out from the cold electric mirror, smashing onto Guru Gu he's body. At the same time, Wuqi took out all the immortal talismans given to him by Patriarch Jiang Yun, by Xia and Qing Wu, throwing them behind him as if his life depended on it. Pilgrim Gu he gave a muffled snort. Visible lines of muscles bulged out from under his skin, as he had activated his golden Arhat body. The thunderbolts unleashed by the cold electric mirror landed on his body and exploded, producing loud tinkling noises as if he was striking a huge golden bell. However, it only tore a small patch of skin on his chest, and not even a single drop of blood gushed out. However, the cold electric mirror was, after all, fused with a clump of 9 Heavens Dipper Thunder essence. And after a long period of cultivation by Wuxia, its power had reached the level of an ordinary immortal item. Although the thunderbolts did not severely injure Guru Guhi, they had consumed a great deal of his energy. He felt a dull pain in his chest, and his vision turned dark as he was forced to hover on the spot, unable to move. Several dozens of immortal talismans exploded. Instead of using the standard method to trigger the immortal spells and divine abilities contained in the talismans, Wuxia used the most violent and direct method to detonate them at the same time. Large sheets of white clouds, water vapor, green mist, and strong light turned into a hazy ball of light and shadow and exploded. The sharp claws unleashed by Guru Gu, he were instantly ripped to shreds, while the tunnel opened up by Patriarch Yuan Hua was also destroyed by the explosion. As the immortal talismans twisted the tunnel, the chaotic airflows in the surroundings surged in a messy manner, nearly dragging Guru Guhi into the chaotic starry sky. It scared him so much that he cried out miserably, grabbing Reverend Miao Miao's ankle, who was rushing towards him. Only then did he manage to struggle out of the chaotic space. On the other hand, all the immortals who were chasing after them were blocked by the sudden collapse of the tunnel with their divine wills and visions. Because of that, the distance between them and Wuxia became much further. Seizing the opportunity, Patriarch Yuan Hua abruptly changed his flying direction, breaking through the chaotic starry sky and flying diagonally towards it. Bringing Wuxia and the others, Daoist Qi quickly followed behind him. He did not forget to pat Wuqi's shoulder and praise loudly, "Wuxia, my good boy, you've done a great job." Patriarch Yuan Hua, who was busy opening up a path in the front, also praised loudly, "You've done a great job. As long as we can make it through today, this immortal sword will be the cornerstone treasure of Yuan Hua sect." "Excellent, excellent. I never expected Huiling to have such a precious treasure in her hand. That's why we messed up the situation. Otherwise, everything would be within our plan." Upon hearing that, Wuxia smiled wryly. When they were having a secret discussion in Green Cliff Mountain, he did not expect this to be the result. Originally, everything had been settled. Wuxia and the rest of the 110 disciples would defeat the disciples of Huiling sect, seizing the ownership of the Energy Stone planet. This was the first step that they should take. After that, Patriarch Yuan Hua would stay in Green Cliff Planet until Reverend Huiling issued the challenge. At that time, he would rush to the scene through the teleportation formation that he had prepared beforehand and face the severely wounded Reverend Huiling with his uninjured body. As long as Patriarch Yuan Hua killed Reverend Huiling, Yuan Hua sect would have won the match. But unexpectedly, the reason why Reverend Huiling had the courage to raise his bet was actually an immortal sword of 18th tier or above. It had thrown the situation into chaos, forcing the people of Yuan Hua sect to flee in panic. Furthermore, Wuxia was curious if Patriarch Yuan Hua would use that strange little strip of cloth if Reverend Huiling did not possess this immortal sword. As the little strip of cloth was able to kill Reverend Huiling in an instant, its origin must be extraordinary. Judging from its appearance, it should be Patriarch Yuan Hua's trump card. Nevertheless, although the situation had changed, the result was still good. Yuan Hua sect had won the Huangqiao planet justifiably. Not only had their territory doubled in size, they had also occupied the entire Energy Stone planet. With that, the future of their sect was going to be very bright. At the thought of this, no matter it was Patriarch Yuan Hua, Daoist Qi, or even Wuxia and the other disciples of Yuan Hua sect, all of them laughed out loud, their voices filled with complacency. Not only Huangqiao planet and the Energy Stone planet, but Patriarch Yuan Hua had also obtained an upper-grade immortal sword. With that, Yuan Hua sect would definitely be the biggest power in Puyo Heavenly Realm in the future. With a powerful sect as their backing, the future development of their disciples would be unimaginable. Suddenly, the pressure coming from the front lessened, as Patriarch Yuan Hua brought all his disciples and rushed out of the chaotic starry sky. The immortal sword in his hand suddenly let out a faint cry. Taking advantage of the moment when the item spirit was at its weakest, Patriarch Yuan Hua had forcibly branded it with his divine will. Right at this moment, a strange beam of light approached from the side. It was Reverend Yun, who had come before Patriarch Yuan Hua in a flustered and exasperated manner. Yuan Hua, how dare you kill a disciple of eminent cloud sect? Reverend Yun immediately unleashed a thunderbolt. Chapter 404. Time returned to the time when Wuxia sneaked into the ancient mansion and subdued the innate yin energy. On Green Cliff Mountain, Patriarch Yuan Hua, who had fully recovered from his injuries, had broken through the bottleneck of peak stage 28th tier and stepped into the realm of 27th tier heaven immortal, was sitting cross-legged on the mountaintop, exercising his nascent divinity and nourishing the cloud shadow sword in his spiritual ocean. Next to him was a teleportation formation, about 1,000 feet in diameter. It was a grand universal teleportation formation that could teleport him alone to the void where Wuxia and the others were. Right when Wuxia entered the spherical space where the ancient mansion was located, and at the moment when everyone's attention was attracted by the landmass, he had thrown a teleportation formation near the entrance. Therefore, Patriarch Yuan Hua was able to arrive at the scene of the duel with the fastest speed. A tiny green beetle was seen lying on Patriarch Yuan Hua's chest. It was the sun beetle of the mother sun green beetles, while the other mother beetle was brought by Daoist Qi. As soon as the result of the duel was decided, Reverend Huilin would issue a challenge, and Daoist Qi would use his hand to stimulate the mother beetle, causing the sun beetle to react. That would allow Patriarch Yuan Hua to arrive in time. Patriarch Yuan Hua sat on the mountaintop, trying his best to adjust his condition. A faint smile could be seen on his lips. He was very satisfied with Patriarch Jiang Yun, Wuxia, and all the other disciples. Never in his wildest dreams did he expect that Patriarch Jiang Yun could establish such a huge foundation and train such an excellent group of disciples. Whether it was the duel or the duel, Yuan Hua sect was bound to gain a complete victory and lay the foundation of becoming the #1 immortal sect in Puyo heavenly realm. How could they have such a good opportunity during normal times? The celestial court had a very tight control over all the heavenly realms. If two great immortal sects were to fight each other for no reason, the immortal monarchs of the celestial court would interfere. Therefore, even though Yuan Hua sect's overall strength was far stronger than Huiling sect's, they could not openly occupy Huiling sect's foundation. But Reverend Huilin actually came knocking on their door? No matter what trump card he had, Patriarch Yuan Hua stroked the 3 strips of cloth in his sleeve, and his heart was immediately filled with confidence. When Patriarch Yuan Hua was still an ordinary nascent soul cultivator, he was fond of traveling. As long as he could accumulate some energy stones, he would travel to various planets in Puyo heavenly realm through teleportation formations to broaden his horizons. One year, on a barren planet, Patriarch Yuan Hua came across an immortal who had fallen from the sky, his body covered in blood, and only his head barely intact. The immortal was on the verge of death, but Patriarch Yuan Hua's luck had taken a turn for the better. He found a green jade milk in that barren, desolate place that was only used as a transit planet for a void teleportation formation. It was a spirit medicine that could nourish the immortal soul, gather energy, and bring the dead back to life. On top of that, the green jade milk had been growing for tens of periods and contained a very strong natural energy. With this spirit medicine, the compassionate Patriarch Yuan Hua saved the immortal, who had lost all his limbs and all his internal organs destroyed by the thunderflame, with only his head still barely recognizable as a human. After being saved by Patriarch Yuan Hua, the immortal did not say anything. He just pulled off Patriarch Yuan Hua's sleeve and left him 9 shabby-looking spirit talismans that looked like strips of cloth, as well as a promise. Patriarch Yuan Hua had used 6 of the 9 spirit talismans in his many years of cultivation. Each of them had annihilated one or a group of formidable enemies of Patriarch Yuan Hua. From nascent divinity cultivators, ordinary heaven immortals, to the few 29th tier fiend immortals who conspired to seize the foundation of Yuan Hua sect 3 periods ago, none of them could escape the fate of annihilation with these spirit talismans. This was Patriarch Yuan Hua's greatest secret, and also his greatest reliance. It was easy to imagine the overall strength of the immortal, who was saved by Patriarch Yuan Hua, as he was able to make such a powerful spirit talisman out of ordinary linen strips. The promise the immortal made to Patriarch Yuan Hua was that if Patriarch Yuan Hua could break through the realm of Gold Immortal one day, he would take him as his disciple, as well as all of Patriarch Yuan Hua's disciples. If any of Patriarch Yuan Hua's disciples could break through the realm of Gold Immortal, that immortal would take Patriarch Yuan Hua as his disciple as well. Once he broke through the realm of Gold Immortal, that immortal would take him as his disciple as well. Patriarch Yuan Hua twitched his lips and smiled wryly helplessly. He knew he was lucky enough to save an extraordinary figure, but the condition of taking him as his disciple was a little too harsh. Only a gold immortal could be his disciple. What was the cultivation base of that immortal? Patriarch Yuan Hua breathed out a faint sigh and stopped his recollection. He ran his fingers over the 3 tiny strips of cloth talismans, wondering what kind of trump card Reverend Huilin would have waiting for him. But no matter what trump card Reverend Huilin had, it could not be as powerful as these spirit talismans. Grinning coldly, Patriarch Yuan Hua began to think about the discussion he had with Wuxia and the others. Patriarch Yuan Hua had always had the ambition to strengthen Yuan Hua Immortal Sect, because with a strong foundation, he would be able to obtain more cultivation resources, such as immortal stones. With a great amount of immortal stones, the speed of immortals' cultivation could be increased. Therefore, a long time ago, Patriarch Yuan Hua had begun to plant spies in other immortal sections. Initially, it was the disciples of Huiling's sect who found the clue about the planet of energy stones before Patriarch Yuan Hua. But Patriarch Yuan Hua soon received the news, and was the first to set out. As a result, he found the planet earlier than Huiling's sect, and gained the upper hand in terms of morality. But this time, Eminent Cloud Sect had a very strange reaction after Catfish Flood Dragon devoured Yin Tianhao's grandnephew. Immediately, Patriarch Yuan Hua activated the spies in Eminent Cloud Sect, and found out some news that made his heart race. Snow-armored heaven-devouring python, Eminent Cloud Sect's biggest reliance, was about to transcend the thunder tribulation of shapeshifting. Once he transcended the tribulation, he would be able to transform into a human, and his divine abilities and magical power would be greatly improved. The reason why Eminent Cloud Sect had swallowed the grievance of Catfish Flood Dragon was that snow-armored heaven-devouring python could not make a move now, and Reverend Yun was afraid that someone might take advantage of him. Therefore, they dared not to pursue the matter. On the other hand, the higher-ups of Eminent Cloud Sect had come to a decision. Once snow-armored heaven-devouring python transcended the thunder tribulation, Eminent Cloud Sect would seek revenge. What made Patriarch Yuan Hua even more worried and angry was that Eminent Cloud Sect had long decided to annex Huiling's sect and Yuan Hua sect. Huiling's sect and Yuan Hua sect were fighting like tigers, and most of their heaven immortals were wounded. It would take them at least 10,000 years to fully recover. Therefore, no matter who won in the end, the overall strength of both immortal sects would suffer a great loss. Some of Reverend Yun's disciples from Eminent Cloud Sect were serving in the Celestial Court. As a result, the relationship between Eminent Cloud Sect and the Celestial Court was closer than that of all the other immortal sects in Puyo Heavenly Realm. Therefore, Reverend Yun had made a decision. After the duel between Patriarch Yuan Hua and Reverend Huilin, no matter who won, one of them would die in the fight between 2 tigers. Eminent Cloud Sect would seize the opportunity to strike with all their might, devouring the one who lost between Yuan Hua sect and Huiling sect. In order to achieve this goal, Reverend Yun had even found a substitute, who transformed into his own appearance and watched the duel. As for Reverend Yun himself, he brought a group of tens of immortals from his sect, hiding somewhere near Huiling sect's Huangqiao planet. Once he received the news of Reverend Huilin's defeat, he would immediately bring his men to Huangqiao planet and destroy Huiling sect's foundation. Meanwhile, another group of 13 immortals from Eminent Cloud Sect had snuck into Yuan Hua sect a long time ago, waiting to launch a surprise attack on Yuan Hua sect's Spirit Pills Palace and other important places. If the loser of the duel was Patriarch Yuan Hua, once he died, the morale of Yuan Hua sect would plunge into chaos, and 13 heaven immortals would be more than enough to cause a great damage to Yuan Hua sect. Eminent Cloud Sect's wishful thinking had shaken the heavens, and Patriarch Yuan Hua had cooperated with them, allowing them to do whatever they wanted. The 13 immortals from Eminent Cloud Sect had snuck into Green Cliff Planet a few months ago, disguised as itinerant cultivators. Currently, they were living in Green Cliff Immortal Market, spending their days leisurely, enjoying fine wine and beautiful women. But today it was time to draw in the net. This was the plan put forward by Wuxia. Since Eminent Cloud Sect wanted to extend their hands to Green Cliff Immortal Market, they would have to cut off their claws. Even if they had to sacrifice the entire Green Cliff Immortal Market, they would have to kill all 13 Heaven Immortals from Eminent Cloud Sect. With that, Eminent Cloud Sect's overall strength would be greatly reduced, and they would no longer dare to lay their hands on Yuanhua Sect. Even if Eminent Cloud Sect brought the lawsuit to Immortal Chuan, Yuanhua Sect would still be in the right. 13 Heaven Immortals from Eminent Cloud Sect had snuck into Yuanhua Sect for no reason. What good could that be? At that point in time, as long as they killed all the witnesses, they could just say that 13 Heaven Immortals from Eminent Cloud Sect had attacked Yuanhua Sect intentionally. With that, they would be the scapegoat, and Eminent Cloud Sect would not be afraid of a lawsuit. Just as Patriarch Yuanhua was recalling the plan he and Wuxia came up with, a communication jade slip placed next to him suddenly moved, and a soft voice drifted out from it. The grand array that was set up near the Green Cliff Immortal Market had already been activated, and the entire market had been completely surrounded. 13 Heaven Immortals from Eminent Cloud Sect were now attacking the formation that trapped them. However, there were 10 Heaven Immortals from Yuanhua Sect guarding Green Cliff Planet, and they had the advantage of being the host. With the formation completely trapping the Heaven Immortals from Eminent Cloud Sect, there was no chance for them to escape. After listening to the report from the disciples, Patriarch Yuanhua grinned coldly, then sped towards Green Cliff Immortal Market with his sword in hand. With the help of the formation, Patriarch Yuanhua fought a fierce battle, and killed all 13 Heaven Immortals from Eminent Cloud Sect. However, he himself suffered a serious injury as well. After killing all the Heaven Immortals from Eminent Cloud Sect who had snuck into Green Cliff Planet, Patriarch Yuanhua immediately heard a shrill cry from the Green Lotus Immortals. Without hesitation, Patriarch Yuanhua stepped into the teleportation formation and rushed to the scene of the duel. When he saw that Reverend Huilan's trump card was actually an upper-grade immortal sword, Patriarch Yuanhua immediately used a spirit talisman and killed Reverend Huilan on the spot. In the end, the immortal sword was too attractive and attracted the attack of so many immortals at the scene. Without hesitation, Patriarch Yuanhua brought all his disciples and fled from the scene. Unexpectedly, Eminent Cloud Sect reacted very quickly. Reverend Yun had already learned that his disciples who had snuck into Green Cliff Planet were killed. Knowing that his plan was exposed, Reverend Yun did not want to suffer such a loss. Flustered and exasperated, he immediately rushed over and stopped Patriarch Yuanhua and his company. Relying on the fact that his cultivation base was stronger than Patriarch Yuanhua, Reverend Yun threw all caution to the wind and unleashed a thunderbolt. But what Reverend Yun did not know was that Patriarch Yuanhua was no longer the same as before. He was now a 27th tier Heaven Immortal. Looking at the thunderbolt plunging down from above, Patriarch Yuanhua grinned coldly. Abruptly, the immortal sword in his hand shone with a large sheet of golden light, transforming into a beam of light that swept out. Chapter 405. Daoist Yun's meticulous plan was ruined by someone, and he even lost 13 Heaven Immortal Sect disciples. He was so angry that his brain was about to boil. 13 Heaven Immortal Sect disciples were not in the realm of nascent soul or nascent divinity. Everyone below the realm of Heaven Immortal was an ant, and nascent divinity cultivators could be cultivated at any time. But these were 13 Heaven Immortals. Eminent Cloud Sect had been established for several hundreds of periods, but they had only produced a total of over 40 Heaven Immortals. But before he could get any benefits from the scheme he had painstakingly schemed against Yuanhua Sect and Huiling Sect, 13 of his Heaven Immortals were killed. 1/3 of Eminent Cloud Sect's overall strength was wiped out just like that. More importantly, one of the 13 Heaven Immortals who were killed on Green Cliff Planet was Reverend Yun's illegitimate son. Yes, an illegitimate son. Reverend Yun had an affair with one of his disciples, and they secretly gave birth to this child. The blood essence of a heaven immortal was very precious. If not for the fact that Reverend Yun loved his disciple very much, he would not have agreed to give birth to this child. Nevertheless, since he had given birth to this child, Reverend Yun cherished him very much. None of the descriptions such as the apple of his eye could describe how much Reverend Yun loved him. In fact, Reverend Yun had even found a way to get this child to serve in the celestial court as long as his cultivation base improved by another level. But, today Patriarch Yuan Hua had killed Reverend Yun's illegitimate son, and 12 of his disciples. Yuan Hua, you old villain! Give me back my son. Exasperated, Reverend Yun did not care whether his illegitimate son could be exposed or not. After unleashing the first thunderbolt, he followed it up with several dozens of thunderbolts. Eminent Cloud Sect's cultivation technique was based on the technique of water and thunder. The immortals of Eminent Cloud Sect had mastered the acquired water element thunderbolts, and the power of their thunder technique was second to none in Pulyuo Heavenly Realm. If it were any other day, Patriarch Yuan Hua would have suffered a great loss from the thunderbolts. But now his cultivation base was at the same level as Reverend Yun, and he was armed with an upper-grade immortal item. Amidst the blinding golden light, a long golden beam shot out and swept away the dozens of thunderbolts unleashed by Reverend Yun. Then, the sword beam swept across Reverend Yun's body, causing his Taoist robe to glow with an immortal gleam. However, as the golden beam flashed, his defensive immortal robe was ripped apart, and the sword beam pierced right through his body. A miserable howl rang out. As Reverend Yun was not present just now, and did not know the origin of the immortal sword, he could never have dreamed that Patriarch Yuan Hua would be holding such a powerful weapon. The sword beam pierced through his body and sliced Reverend Yun's ribs into two. Golden immortal blood splashed in all directions. Reverend Yun's lower body was thrown far away, while 3 big mouths stretched over impatiently. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Catfish Flood Dragon opened their mouths and bit Reverend Yun's lower body, ripping it into 3 pieces and swallowing them. Wuqi's eyelids twitched at the sight. It was such a good material, but it was wasted by these 3 fellows. Looking around, Wuqi was wondering if he should expose some of his treasures, so that he could keep Reverend Yun's upper body. Suddenly, a loud rumble rang out from the chaotic starry sky behind him. Strange lights kept flashing and flashing, as over 1,000 immortals rushed out together with their disciples. Pilgrim Gu He was at the forefront, roaring furiously. Fellow immortal Yuan Hua, that sword and the Buddhist League. Guru Gu He shut his mouth abruptly, because Patriarch Yuan Hua had casually tossed the immortal sword up into the air. The immortal sword transformed into a dazzling golden beam of light, wheeling around Patriarch Yuan Hua for a while. It came with an extremely astonishing momentum, and a scorching heat wave came blowing at Guru Gu He's face, making it hard for him to breathe. Guru Gu He, who was originally angry, suddenly smiled sweetly. He put his palms together and softly chanted the name of Buddha, then said with a smile, "So that's how it is. I was wrong. This sword is destined to be with fellow immortal Yuan Hua. Fellow immortal Yuan Hua, if you have time, please pay me a visit on my barren mountain. We need to get to know each other." Patriarch Yuan Hua stroked his beard and laughed. He nodded and said, "I'll definitely pay you a visit." With a smile on his face, Pilgrim Gu He took a few steps back, gazed at Wuqi with a friendly look in his eyes, and nodded his head intimately. It was as if the incident of Wuqi knocking his prime Buddhist treasure away had never happened. And Pilgrim Gu He's attitude towards Wuqi was extremely warm and affectionate. Wuqi gave Pilgrim Gu He a cold glance. He was not in the mood to talk to this monk, who could change his expression faster than anyone else. Those immortals who rushed out from behind Pilgrim Gu He halted their steps as well. Since Patriarch Yuan Hua had refined this immortal sword, it would be too difficult for them to seize it. For a moment, all the immortals who had joined hands to attack Patriarch Yuan Hua turned to him and said, "Congratulations on obtaining such a precious treasure, fellow immortal Yuan Hua. As the saying goes, spirit treasures choose their own masters. Fellow immortal Yuan Hua is a man with great fortune." Patriarch Yuan Hua nodded with a smile, cupping his fist and greeting the immortals enthusiastically. Only Reverend Yun flew back to Eminent Cloud Sect's team with a stream of blood in his body. The Reverend Yun, who was sitting on the giant black crane, cried out in alarm. With a twist of his body, he transformed into a burly man with a long beard, grabbed Reverend Yun's upper body and cried out, "Master, who hurt you?" Although that was what he asked, the burly man's eyes had already turned to look at Patriarch Yuan Hua. It was a well-known fact that apart from Immortal Chuan, Reverend Yun was the strongest expert in Puyo Heavenly Realm. Among so many immortals present, apart from Patriarch Yuan Hua, who else could cut Reverend Yun's body into two so cleanly and neatly? Patriarch Yuan Hua smiled and shook his head without saying a word. He was in a good mood now, and was just waiting for Eminent Cloud Sect to make their move. He did not want to waste his breath. Reverend Yun pointed his fingers in the air, barely forming a dozen incantation gestures to stop the blood from bursting out. After that, he cried out at Immortal Chuan with a heart-wrenching voice, "Immortal Monarch, please seek justice for Eminent Cloud Sect. Yuan Hua Sect has killed 13 of our heaven immortals for no reason, and even beat me into such a sorry state. Immortal Monarch, please seek justice for Eminent Cloud Sect." At this moment, Reverend Yun really wished he could establish a good relationship with Immortal Chuan. If he had a daughter, he would be more than happy to give her to Immortal Chuan as a concubine. But now, he was severely wounded, and his sect had lost 13 heaven immortals. The overall strength of Eminent Cloud Sect had suffered a great loss, and without the support of a powerful backer, Eminent Cloud Sect might really face the calamity of destruction. In recent years, Eminent Cloud Sect had been acting in an unscrupulous and overbearing manner. From the incident of Yun Wuqi forcibly robbing Peppermint and Angelica, one could easily tell what kind of conduct Eminent Cloud Sect had. No one knew how many enemies were secretly keeping their eyes on Eminent Cloud Sect. If they were not careful, Eminent Cloud Sect's foundation would be torn apart by countless enemies. Upon seeing Reverend Yun's miserable appearance, Immortal Chuan could not help but narrow his eyes, giving Patriarch Yuan Hua a quick glance. Patriarch Yuan Hua cupped his fist and said, "Please seek justice for me, Immortal Monarch." It was Eminent Cloud Sect who sent their disciples to sneak into Green Cliff Planet, hiding in Green Cliff Immortal Market and plotting against us. As Yuan Hua was meditating and preparing for the duel in Green Cliff Mountain, they mistakenly thought that I had left Green Cliff Planet. Therefore, they suddenly launched an attack with the intention of looting Green Cliff Immortal Market, and were killed by Yuan Hua. They were tall and burly, yet they did not emanate any energy ripple. Behind these soldiers was a thin layer of mist, within which the shadows of various ferocious beasts could be vaguely seen. On the flying ship in the middle, a 10-feet-tall burly man was hammering a dragon-skinned war drum with a deafening sound. Although there was no air in the starry sky, the drumming still went straight into everyone's ears, causing them a dull pain in their ears and making them lose their balance. There was a tall flagpole on every flying ship, on which a huge flag, measuring several tens of feet in circumference, was fluttering even though there was no wind. With a keen eyesight, Wuqi saw a huge character, several tens of feet in both width and length, embroidered on the flag. Using this pale green character as the background color, a row of characters was embroidered neatly in the middle of the flag. "Do you patrolling heaven, guarding the land and protecting the people, Marquis Jianyu Hua Heavenly Realm, Marquis Jianyu." Immortal Chuan was taken aback. Together with the other immortal monarchs, he cursed at the same time. "Marquis Jianyu Zong, what is he doing here? Damn it." It was a spectacular sight to see a few immortal monarchs cursing at the same time. Even Wuqi could not help but be stunned. After that, cold sweat broke out from Wuqi's back as he exchanged a glance with Princess Zhonglu in shock. "Marquis Jian Yuzong." Chapter 406. Human Emperor. Ever since the ancient great saint, Huahuang clan, joined hands with many almighty experts and created the human race by combining the bloodlines of divine dragons, phoenixes, cheilants, and many other divine beasts, using the divine light and spirituality of the myriad spirit cauldron as the foundation, and combining them with the bloodlines of divine dragons, phoenixes, cheilants, and many other divine beasts, human emperors were born. Some were wise, some were mighty. Some could cut through all the obstacles and create a fertile land for the human race to survive. And some could slay demons and devils to protect the development of the human race. Since the era of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, the human race had built the only dynasty since the beginning of time. You, human emperor, you had infeft all the heavenly realms, appointed the protector of the people, and protected the human race in all directions. Accompanied by the muffled beating of dragonhide war drums, 30 flying ships approached the crowd at top speed. Wuxia saw the strange expressions on the faces of Immortal Chuan and the other immortal monarchs. It was as if there was a big pile of dog poop placed in front of them, and they had no choice but to swallow it, licking their lips and saying that it tasted delicious. It was an indescribable expression. Wuxia also noticed that Immortal Chuan's left hand, which was placed behind his back, had clenched into a fist with blue veins protruding out of the back of it. Suddenly loud shouts of "Ha-ha!" were heard coming from the flying ships. It was a thunderous roar, and filled with towering killing intent. Large groups of armored soldiers rushed out of the cabins and lined up on the deck like Chi-Chi, their eyes flickering with a cold gleam as they stared coldly at the immortals and cultivators on Wuqi's side. An undisguised hostility and opposing aura made Wuqi frown. The relationship between Marquis Jian, Yuzong, and the immortals was not good. The reaction of the heaven immortals from the nearby heavenly realms was also very interesting. Cautiously, they retreated a few miles back and formed into the most traditional formation of 9 palaces and 8 trigrams, assuming a defensive posture. The heaven immortals stood on the periphery, while their disciples guarded the inner formation. It reminded Wuqi of the African bison back on Earth. When they encountered wild beasts, they used this formation to protect their calves. The might of a human emperor was indeed extraordinary. Holding Princess Zhongli's hand, Wuqi looked coldly at Immortal Chuan and the other immortal monarchs as they walked towards the flying ship in the middle. Patriarch Yuan Hua raised his hand and gestured for all the immortals and cultivators of Yuan Hua sect to step back and join the 9 palaces and 8 trigrams formation. A deep laughter rang out from the flying ship in the middle. A chariot pulled by 3 flood dragons darted out from the flying ship, flying towards Immortal Chuan and the other immortal monarchs, escorted by nearly 100 armored warriors. On the chariot, a valiant-looking middle-aged man, who was wearing a jade-colored battle robe and a light golden armor, and had a crimson cloak on his back, was sitting straight on a bronze throne that was carved with countless images of fierce beasts, looking at them coldly. The appearance of this middle-aged man was 80% similar to Yu Hada, Yu Hetian, and Yu Heling. Wuqi and Princess Zhonglu exchanged a glance. Yu Zong, the Marquis Jian of Yu Dynasty who governed Yu Hua Heavenly Realm, was the father of the 3 dead men. Yu Hua Heavenly Realm was a mid-upper grade heavenly realm that was very far away from Piluo Heavenly Realm, and it was where Yu Zong Marquis Jian governed. His jurisdiction covered a very vast area of the starry sky around Yu Hua Heavenly Realm, and even Piluo Heavenly Realm was under his jurisdiction. Of course, after several apocalypses, the Celestial Court was established, and the almighty experts in the universe had set the rules. The Celestial Court governed the immortals, the human emperor governed the mortals, and the mortals and immortals ruled independently without interfering with each other. Although Yu Zong's jurisdiction was very vast, he was just a marquis of the land protector conferred by the human emperor. Thus, he had no authority over the immortal monarchs of the Celestial Court. Immortal Chuan and the others were just fearful and helpless when facing Yu Zong. Immortal Chuan laughed dryly, sounding like he was crying. He realized that it was a very unpleasant laughter, and stopped abruptly after a few dry laughs. Then he cupped his fist and bowed to Yu Zong, who was sitting in the chariot, and said, "Greetings, Marquis Jian." Sitting in the chariot, Yu Zong did not rise to his feet, nor did he return the greeting. Instead, he gave Immortal Chuan a cold grin and said arrogantly, "Dispense with the formalities." The 3 simple words made the faces of Immortal Chuan and the other few immortal monarchs turn red instantly. A faint immortal pressure spread out and quickly enveloped all the armored soldiers on the 30 flying ships led by Yu Zong. All the armored soldiers let out a loud cry at the same time. A towering killing intent converged into a nearly corporeal sword energy, slashing viciously onto the immortal pressure unleashed by Immortal Chuan and the others, ripping it into pieces. Suddenly, Patriarch Yuanhua laughed in a low voice and said, "This Marquis Jian Yuzong is just as the rumor said, arrogant and unruly. He, if not for the fact that the celestial court has to show some respect to the human emperor, someone like him would have long been killed by those almighty immortals." Wu Qi's eyes flickered as he asked in a low voice, "Ancestral Master, roughly how strong is this Yuzong's overall strength?" Patriarch Yuanhua said coolly, "Yuzong Marquis Jian is the overseer of Yuhua Heavenly Realm, protecting the safety of the human race in this part of the universe. TSK, this is just an empty title. The mortals living in the territories of various immortal sects have long established their own dynasties. How can he interfere in their affairs? He is nothing more than a spy sent by the human emperor of Yu dynasty to this part of the universe. His overall strength is really strong. I reckon his cultivation base is at least equivalent to a 20th tier heaven immortal? 20th tier heaven immortal? His overall strength was about 200 times that of a 36th tier heaven immortal. Compared to Patriarch Yuanhua's current cultivation base of 27th tier, Yuzong's overall strength was about 4 times greater. But with the golden immortal sword in his hand, Patriarch Yuanhua's overall strength was more than enough to fight against Yuzong. Therefore, he did not have to fear Yuzong's overall strength. There were tens of thousands of armored soldiers on the 30 flying ships brought by Yuzong, and their overall strength was not weak at all. Yuzong's military strength was far stronger than any immortal sect in Puyo Heavenly Realm, and this was the biggest fear these immortals had for him. None of the immortal sects in Puyo Heavenly Realm had such a strong backing like Yuzong. The few immortal monarchs, who were infuriated by Yu Miao's rude behavior just now, had their immortal aura shattered by the killing intent unleashed by the armored soldiers. Their bodies trembled, and their faces turned extremely unsightly. Immortal Chuan sneered and said, "Is Marquis Jian purposely trying to humiliate us by coming here? If Marquis Jian only wants a few enemies, we know we are no match for him. I'll report to Heavenly Lord Sanyu of Yuhua Heavenly Realm now, and ask him to explain things to Marquis Jian. What do you think?" Heavenly Lord Sanyu of Yuhua Heavenly Realm was an experienced heaven immortal with an extremely profound cultivation base. He was the immediate superior of Immortal Chuan and the few other heavenly monarchs, and was in charge of controlling the vast starry sky around Yuhua Heavenly Realm. His territory was even larger than Marquis Jian's Yuzong, and he was the only person who could suppress Yuzong in this region. On top of that, Heavenly Lord Sanyu had a very strong backing in the celestial court. No matter it was his own overall strength or the power behind him, he could easily suppress Yuzong. Upon hearing Immortal Chuan's words, Yuzong suddenly sneered and said, "Using Heavenly Lord Sanyu to suppress Yuzong? Hee." While laughing coldly, Yuzong rubbed his nose. There were a few very obvious black lines on his nose. Obviously, they were the marks left by the ghost aura in his body after he was struck by the ghost curse unleashed by Princess Zhongli last time. Princess Zhongli twisted her tiny waist complacently, then gently grabbed Wu Qi's palm, and sent a voice transmission to Wu Qi. "How is the power of Zixian's curse? Even a 20th tier heaven immortal could not withstand the power of that ghost curse." Wu Qi nodded silently. It was a little surprising that the ghost curse unleashed by Princess Zhongli had really hurt Yuzong. Yuzong let out a few unpleasant hisses from his nose, then put down his palm and said in a cold voice, "I know that you, Immortal Chuan, have found an ancient mansion of Yu dynasty." Immortal Chuan's expression changed abruptly. With a livid face he cried out, "What do you want?" Yuzong waved his hand and put on a very generous face as he said, "I'm not in a good mood these days, so I won't waste my breath on you. I only want the treasures left in the core of the ancient mansion. Those treasures belong to the human race, and they are useless to you immortals. Apart from that, I won't take anything from you. What do you say?" Immortal Chuan's face turned even more unsightly. "That's unreasonable," he said coldly. "If you bring those treasures of the human race to the market in the celestial court, you can exchange them for a considerable amount of immortal stones, immortal items, or immortal pills. How can you just take them for nothing?" Yu Zong rubbed his nose, and the unpleasant hisses came from his nostrils once again. His body trembled slightly, and he said angrily, "Cut the crap. I'm not going to take all these benefits for nothing. I've brought so many soldiers here, and I've spent so much on eating and drinking all the way here. I've brought 30 battleships with me, and the energy stones I've spent to travel across the starry sky are not small. Immortal Chuan, don't be so shameless." Wu Qi shook his head. Why is this Yu Zong behaving like a bandit? Of course, as he had just lost 3 sons, Wu Qi could understand his feelings. Looking at Immortal Chuan and the others, Wu Qi sighed silently. Vaguely, Wu Qi had a feeling that Yu Zong was venting all his anger on Immortal Chuan and the others. Daoist Qi came next to Patriarch Yuan Hua and asked in a low voice, "Master, if a fight breaks out, are we going to help the immortal monarchs?" Patriarch Yuan Hua turned his head and gave the heaven immortals from Eminent Cloud Sect a look. Apart from Reverend Yin, a few Eminent Cloud Sect immortals were staring at them with a fierce gleam in their eyes. Patriarch Yuan Hua shook his head lightly and said, "If a fight breaks out, bring your children back to Green Cliff Planet. Then go and reinforce your junior brother. I'll stay here and hold the line for the few immortal monarchs." With the golden immortal sword, Patriarch Yuan Hua was filled with confidence, and said that he would help the few immortal monarchs to hold the line. When his words were heard by the other heaven immortals, they were filled with envy and jealousy. But Reverend Yun's heart sank. Reinforce Daoist Min? Why would Daoist Qi reinforce Daoist Min? What was Daoist Min doing now? While all the immortals were having their own thoughts, Yu Zong suddenly gave an impatient roar, clenching his right fist and thrusting it toward Immortal Chuan. Immortal Chuan did not expect that Yu Zong was really as barbaric as the rumors said, and the punch landed squarely on his body. The official robe of immortal monarchs worn by Immortal Chuan was a lower-grade immortal item given to him by the Celestial Court when he was appointed as an immortal official. As soon as Yu Zong punched out, a crisp bird cry rang out from Immortal Chuan's immortal robe, and a green sparrow darted out from it, bringing with it a large cloud of smoke. The cloud of smoke wheeled and wheeled, and there was a vague gleam of rivers and mountains flickering in it. Yu Zong's punch sank into the cloud, and suddenly became slower and slower. Yu Zong sneered, then suddenly cried out, "Jade butterfly hissing wind kill!" A jade-colored cloud of smoke rushed out from behind Yu Zong's back, within which came the soul of a jade-colored butterfly, about 1,000 feet long, with a flash, transformed into a beam of strong jade-colored light, and attached itself to Yu Zong's right arm. The power of Yu Zong's punch was suddenly increased by at least 100 times, accompanied by an extremely unpleasant ripping noise. Dozens of holes were ripped open on Immortal Chuan's immortal robe, as Yu Zong's punch landed on Immortal Chuan's right chest. Countless jade-colored butterfly-shaped beams shot out from Yu Zong's fist and smashed into Immortal Chuan's body. Immortal Chuan howled miserably as his right chest was completely shattered, and his right arm was knocked flying away by Yu Zong's punch, together with a large amount of golden immortal blood and pale golden flesh. Tens of thousands of armored soldiers on the 30 battleships roared in unison, and all 30 battleships charged forward abruptly. Chapter 407. The few immortal monarchs flew into a rage when they saw Yu Zong's attack. Without hesitation, they ordered their immortal officers and disciples to charge forward and engage in a fierce battle with Yu Zong's army. Meanwhile, all the heaven immortals of the 5 heavenly realms had fled in all directions. Apart from Patriarch Yuan Hua, and a few others who stayed behind to keep an eye on the few immortal monarchs, the others had long fled with their disciples. Wu Qi wanted to stay and watch the show. After all, Lady Dark Goldwater did not have many memories about Yu Dynasty, and she only had a vague memory of its existence. At first, Wu Qi was wondering if this Yu Dynasty was a small dynasty in some mortal world where Lady Dark Goldwater was born. But little did he expect that it was actually a colossal dynasty built by the entire human race. While pondering over this question, Wu Qi's body suddenly trembled as he suddenly recalled some books Lu Xiaobai had read in the past. Yu Xia Shangzhou. Is this Yu Dynasty the one recorded in the few ancient books on Earth? The one that claimed to be even more ancient than Xia Dynasty? 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, Yu dynasty Hua Huang clan. Could this Yu dynasty be that Yu dynasty? With his mind filled with wild thoughts, Wuqi held Princess Zhongli's little hand and followed Daoist Qi back to Puyo Heavenly Realm. All the disciples who participated in the match had been teleported back to Green Cliff Planet, and only Daoist Qi brought Wuqi and the few others to Tsangtu Planet through a teleportation formation. In the windy plain of Tsangtu Planet, the vast flatland measuring 1,000 miles in circumference sank 1,000 feet into the ground. Huge holes and cracks could be seen everywhere, and the ground was stained with golden and red blood. 2 groups of cultivators were engaged in a life-and-death battle. Together with 18 Yuan Hua Sect's Heaven Immortals, Daoist Min was attacking 10 Eminent Cloud Sect's Heaven Immortals, while several hundred Yuan Hua Sect's Nascent Divinity and Nascent Soul disciples were attacking the less than 100 Eminent Cloud Sect's disciples. A great python, over 3,000 feet long and as white as snow, with scales glinting with a dazzling watery gleam, was spreading its wings, throwing its head back and roaring furiously, spraying a large sheet of blood-red light at a crimson tribulation cloud in the sky. The tribulation cloud rotated unhurriedly, preparing for the next wave of powerful attacks. A strong demonic aura burst out from the great serpent's body. Because of this cold and murderous demonic aura, the area covered by the tribulation clouds grew larger and larger, and the lightning tribulation that was brewing also grew stronger and stronger. The stronger the fiendish demon, and the more ancient the bloodline of the fiendish demon, the more terrifying the lightning tribulation they would have to endure. The snow-armored serpent had reached the level of 25th tier Heaven Immortal before it had to face the thunder tribulation of form transformation. It was not hard to tell how strong it was. However, it was obvious that the thunder tribulation of form transformation that it was about to face was definitely more powerful than the thunder tribulation that an orthodox demon would have to face after transforming into human form. On Myriad Immortals' planet, those demon imperial advisors and sinecures of the 6 dynasties could transform into human form, even though they only had the cultivation base of nascent soul realm. Compared to this snow-armored heaven-devouring python, who had to cultivate to the 25th tier Heaven Immortal realm to face the lightning tribulation of transformation, the gap between them was like the distance between the clouds and the sky. The great serpent's body was riddled with several dozens of huge wounds, and several dozens of scales that were charred and pitch-black by the explosion. After being wounded, the ferocious nature in its bones was aroused. The little immortal aura emanating from its body immediately transformed into a towering evil aura. The dark green demonic aura blanketed an area of several tens of miles in circumference, causing the tribulation clouds in the sky to expand even faster. This was the scene that Wu Qi and his company saw when they arrived at Tsangtu Planet. The disciples of Yuan Hua sect led by Daoist Min had gained the upper hand in all aspects. Apart from the fact that the number of Heaven Immortals brought by Daoist Min was much greater than that of the enemy, they had also launched a sneak attack from behind, and had the help of spies. Furthermore, they had exhausted over 70% of the immortal talismans and Guthyuan vibrating bombs stored in Yuan Hua sect's storage. Upon seeing this, Daoist Qi whistled, brought Wu Qi and the others and charged towards the disciples of Eminent Cloud Sect. With the fall of Reverend Huilin, the decline of Huiling's sect was imminent. Eminent Cloud Sect's Reverend Yun was severely wounded, and they had lost 13 Heaven Immortals. If they could kill all 10 Heaven Immortals here, then take the opportunity when the snow-armored heaven-devouring python was transcending its thunder tribulation to kill this cornerstone of Eminent Cloud Sect, they would lose their status as the #1 immortal sect in Puyo Heavenly Realm, and Yuan Hua sect would definitely rise to power. The bamboo stick in Daoist Qi's hand transformed into layers of green shadows, transforming into a green flood dragon, and swinging its claw at the head of one of Eminent Cloud Sect's Heaven Immortals. The defensive immortal barrier of the Heaven Immortal had been badly damaged by Daoist Min, caught off guard by Daoist Qi's sneak attack. The barrier shattered on the spot, and the flood dragon ripped the top of his head open with one claw. Several tens of greenwood immortal thunders burst out from the flood dragon's mouth, smashing into the Heaven Immortal's head. A miserable shriek echoed out as the immortal's immortal body fell to the ground. A golden immortal soul soared up into the sky, trying to flee. However, the flood dragon transformed from the bamboo stick thrown out by Daoist Qi gave a deafening roar, coiling its body abruptly and transforming into a dazzling green rope that tightly bound the immortal soul. The sound of wind and flame was heard as a large sheet of red flame burst out from the green rope, burning the immortal soul and making it shriek miserably. This was the power of an immortal item. The item spirit had already cultivated to the realm of spirit immortal, and its intelligence was comparable to that of an immortal. It could control the immortal item better, and change its divine abilities and spells according to the actual situation on the battlefield. With the help of the item spirit's incantation, the power unleashed by the immortal item would be at least twice as strong as usual. Daoist Qi had killed one of the enemy's heaven immortals with just one strike, throwing eminent cloud sect's formation into chaos. One of the immortals cried out sternly, "Retreat! All disciples of eminent cloud sect, retreat at once!" But before the immortal could utter 2 words, another heaven immortal cried out sternly, "Don't retreat. Patriarch Shue's thunder tribulation has just descended. No one is allowed to retreat. Protect Patriarch Shue at once. As long as he can transform successfully, all these villains will have to die." While all the disciples of Eminent Cloud Sect were at a loss of what to do, Daoist Qi had already joined the battle with a few heaven immortals who came with him. Wuxia let out a long laugh as he spat out the sword of Greedy Wolf and the Xuanhao sword from Qiqi's sleeves. As Wuqi's cultivation base had improved tremendously, when the sword of Greedy Wolf was unleashed, it would turn into 21 pitch-black wolf heads, streaking across the sky while leaving long trails of light behind them. As long as they touched a human body, a large piece of flesh would be ripped apart by the razor-sharp sword beams. Meanwhile, the Xuanhao sword transformed into a large sheet of pitch-black water mist, rushing forward together with several dozens of looming vortexes. No matter it was flying swords or magical treasures, as long as they were not upper-grade spirit items, they would be corroded by the water mist and slowly crushed into powder. Lord Xianxing and Catfish Flood Dragon simply transformed into their true forms of flood dragons, plunging into the group of Eminent Cloud Sect's nascent soul and nascent divinity disciples, slaughtering them without holding back. Catfish Flood Dragon was carrying a huge hammer in her claw, smashing it in all directions, giving those Eminent Cloud Sect's disciples a great pain. When any ordinary magical treasures touched the heavy hammer, they would immediately lose their luster and crack. Before long, a dozen of Eminent Cloud Sect's disciples were smashed into meat patties and swallowed by Catfish Flood Dragon. However, what made those Eminent Cloud Sect's disciples, and even those heaven immortals, feel a chill from the bottom of their hearts was Princess Zhonglu, who was standing quietly at a distance. She stood on a cloud, her hands constantly changing incantation gestures. She chanted some simple spells such as seal, crack, shatter, restrict, and some other spells. Suddenly, all the energies of those disciples of Eminent Cloud Sect vanished, or their connection with their flying swords and magical treasures were suddenly cut off, or their bodies were ripped apart for no apparent reason. There were even 2 heaven immortals who were accidentally struck by Princess Zhongli's spell, staggering and falling from the sky with their vision darkening. In the end, those heaven immortals from Yuanhua Sect saw the opportunity, and a few immortal swords shot through the air, riddling their bodies with holes. Snow-armored heaven-devouring Python threw his head back and roared furiously. "Little brats of Yuanhua Sect, just wait until I transcend my thunder tribulation of form transformation. I'll definitely put you in a life and death situation. Children of Eminent Cloud Sect. You. After a brief moment of hesitation, Snow-armored heaven-devouring Python bellowed, "Back off. I don't believe I can't transcend this tribulation." It would have been better if Snow-armored heaven-devouring Python did not shout, as Gold Horn and Silver Horn had their attention fixed on those dead Eminent Cloud Sect disciples. His loud roar immediately made the 2 brothers turn their greedy gazes towards him. 2 unpleasant dragon roars rang out, as Gold Horn and Silver Horn transformed into 2 beams of light and sped towards Snow-armored heaven-devouring Python. "He is just a mere snow-armored heaven-devouring Python. I'm the big brother, so I want 60% of his blood essence." Silver Horn did not want to be outdone. As the big brother, you should take care of the little brother. 60% of his blood essence is mine. Shouting and yelling, the two brothers charged toward snow-armored heaven-devouring python, opening their bloody mouths and biting down towards him. Suddenly, snow-armored heaven-devouring python raised his head and fixed his eyes on Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Dragon pythons of fire and ice? Shouldn't you have gone extinct long ago? His voice was filled with unconcealable shock and fear. His tone was filled with both anger and fear, and everyone present could hear it loud and clear. Snow-armored heaven-devouring python's reaction made the hearts of many eminent Cloud sect disciples sink. Not only did this great python of 25th tier heaven immortal realm not dare to fight Goldhorn and Silverhorn, he even spun and fled. He even ignored the thunder tribulation that could strike down from the sky at any time, twisting his body and fleeing into the distance in a wretched manner. Saliva sprayed out from Goldhorn and Silverhorn's mouths as the brothers chased after snow-armored heaven-devouring python with all their might. They were emanating a frightening aura that could only be sensed by the same clan of serpents. It was an absolute suppression that only natural enemies could have on their prey. Snow-armored heaven-devouring python even ignored the fact that Goldhorn and Silverhorn only had the cultivation base of nascent divinity realm. He let out a shrill howl of terror and fled into the distance in a wretched manner. Daoist Chi and Daoist Min nearly fell from the sky. If they knew this snow-armored heaven-devouring python was so afraid of Goldhorn and Silverhorn, why would they fight so desperately? Why would they come up with a plan of a raid of 10,000 miles? Looking at how fast snow-armored heaven-devouring python was fleeing, Wuxia grinned coldly. With a flick of his left wrist, a beam of purple light shot up into the sky, transforming into several dozens of thin purple ropes in just a blink of an eye and tying up the python's body tightly. Goldhorn and Silverhorn roared joyfully and charged forward. Disregarding any danger, the brothers wrapped themselves around snow-armored heaven-devouring python and gave him a heavy bite. In an instant, 2 large strips of flesh were bitten off from the python's body. You've eaten his flesh, but leave his scales to me, or I'll skin you alive. Wuxia cried out hastily. The scales of a 25th tier heaven immortal great python were much better than those left behind by Wanying Dragon King's ancestors who had ascended to the immortal world. Daoist Chi cried out hastily as well. We've eaten his flesh, but the scales belong to Wuxia. As for the serpent bones and tendons, they are supreme-grade materials for crafting immortal items. Daoist Min did not care that Goldhorn and Silverhorn were Wuxia's demon pets. He roared at the top of his voice. There must be a serpent pearl in this snow-armored heaven-devouring python's body. Leave the serpent pearl and I'll exchange all my belongings with you. While the group of people was shouting and yelling, the tribulation cloud trembled, and a violent thunderbolt, about 1 mile in diameter, struck down. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.